So let's get right into it. You've probably seen these figures online or on the news, and they sound incredible, right? A $2,400 boost for the year plus 1,200 bucks a month. But what's the deal here? Are they the same thing? Are they connected? And who would even get this money? It's time to get past the headlines and really look at the nuts and bolts of what lawmakers are actually debating. Okay, first things first, and this is super important to get straight. We are talking about two completely different ideas. They are not the same proposal. On one side, you've got what we're calling a benefit boost. This is a simple, direct increase to the Social Security checks people already get. On the other side is something totally new, an income floor. This would create a brand new kind of payment for a much wider group of people. Getting this distinction is really the key to understanding everything else we're going to talk about. All right, so let's tackle that first proposal, the one that would directly add more money to the monthly checks that millions of Americans rely on. This is the one that's being talked about as a straight-up raise for Social Security recipients. So the idea here is actually pretty straightforward, but wow, it's a big one. It's a flat $200 per month increase for everybody who gets a Social Security check. And that means everybody: retirement, disability or SSDI, survivor's benefits, spousal benefits, all of it. You do the math, and that adds up to a very significant $2,400 over a full year. And the people pushing for this say it's not just another cost of living adjustment, it's a major separate boost to help people finally catch up with rising costs. Now, this isn't just some idea floating around in the ether. It's actually shown up in a couple of different bills in Congress, but they have very different goals. Some lawmakers see it as a temporary fix, like in the Emergency Inflation Relief Act, something to help people get through this period of high prices right now. But others, like in Senator Bernie Sanders' Social Security Expansion Act, want to make this $200 boost a permanent change to the system for the next 75 years. So two very different paths for the same idea. Okay, so that's the Social Security boost. Now, let's switch gears completely and talk about this second idea, which would build an entirely different type of financial safety net. This is not about tweaking a program we already have. This is about creating something brand new. So this whole proposal is based on an idea called Guaranteed Basic Income, or GBI for short. What is that exactly? Well, think of it like this. The goal of GBI is to make sure every single person has a basic amount of money to cover their most essential needs. It creates an income floor that you just can't fall beneath. And unlike a lot of other benefits, these payments are usually unconditional. That means no work requirements, no rules on how you have to spend the money. And the bill that's actually proposing this is called the Support Act. And, it's pretty ambitious. It would set up a GBI program across the whole country, sending $1,200 a month to every eligible American. You can see how this is a totally different animal from the Social Security boost, right? It's not adding to an old benefit, it's creating a new foundational income for millions of people. So who would get this money? Well, it wouldn't be based on your age or if you have a disability, it would be based directly on your income. The plan suggests thresholds of up to $75,000 a year for an individual and up to $150,000 for a married couple. And this is the really interesting part. This means that the vast majority of people on a fixed income, like Social Security, would almost certainly qualify. They could potentially get these payments on top of their regular benefits. So you might be sitting there thinking, okay, these are some huge ideas. Why now? What's going on in the economy that's making lawmakers talk about this stuff so seriously all of a sudden? It's a great question. Well, it really boils down to two huge pressures. The first one is the problem we're all dealing with today: stubborn, persistent inflation. We've all seen prices for gas, groceries, and housing go up, and there's a really strong argument that Social Security's yearly cost of living adjustments, or COLAs, just haven't been enough. In fact, some of the source material called recent COLAs pathetic because they just don't cover the real squeeze people are feeling. The second pressure is the challenge of tomorrow: massive economic disruption. Lawmakers are looking down the road at things like artificial intelligence, robotics, and automation, and they're worried about how many jobs could be displaced. The GBI idea is basically an attempt to build a safety net before that happens. Okay, we've talked about what these plans are and why they're on the table, but now for the million-dollar question, the one I know you're all asking: is any of this actually happening? Are these checks about to be mailed out? Let's be 100% crystal clear on this, because it's probably the most important thing to take away from our chat today. While these are very real proposals being talked about in Washington, neither the $2,400 raise nor the $1,200 monthly checks have been passed into law. They are not approved, they are not happening right now, they are still just proposals. And honestly, this quote from one of the sources we looked at just says it all. The process of making a law is incredibly slow, it's unpredictable. Just because a bill gets introduced doesn't mean it will ever even get a vote, let alone pass and become law. This really drives home the point that we're in the middle of a big, important national conversation, but it's a conversation that hasn't turned into action yet. All right, so we've got these huge, potentially life-changing ideas on one hand, and the slow, grinding reality of politics on the other. So what's the bottom line here? What should you really take away from all this?
Let's just quickly recap. First, always remember we're talking about two totally separate things: a $200 a month boost just for Social Security and a $1,200 a month GBI for low and middle income folks. Second, know that they're trying to solve both today's problem with inflation and tomorrow's problem with job losses from technology. Third, it's interesting to note that while a national GBI is a long shot, more than 150 local and state-level GBI pilot programs are already running across the US, so the idea is being tested. But finally, and I'm gonna say it one more time because it's that important, passage is absolutely not guaranteed for any of this. As of right now, no checks are being sent.
And that really brings us to our final thought for today. The very fact that these conversations are happening at such a high level, it's a huge signal. It tells us that we're in the middle of a massive rethink of our country's entire social safety net. Whether these specific bills pass or not doesn't change the fact that the underlying issues, inflation, technology changing the workforce, those aren't going anywhere. So really, these proposals are just the opening chapter in a much, much bigger debate about what our financial support system needs to look like in the 21st century. You see it everywhere, right? That one constant question, will there be another stimulus check? Well, today we're going to cut through all the noise and get to the real answer. And I'll tell you right now, it is probably not what you think. We're going to show you what really pulls the trigger on these payments. I mean, the chatter online, it's just constant. Everybody's asking when or even if another payment might be on the way to help out. But here's the thing, the real answer isn't going to be found in a YouTube comment section. And this is the absolute key to the whole thing. The actual trigger for a stimulus check has almost nothing to do with petitions or how many people are asking for it. Nope. It's driven by something much, much bigger: the health of the entire US economy. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll tackle what's really driving these decisions. Then, and this is the interesting part, we're going to look at the economic warning signs that are flashing right now. We'll see how this all fits into a really clear historical pattern. And we'll finish up with a simple dashboard you can use to see what might be coming next. All right, first things first. Let's just get one thing completely out of the way, right up front, because this is the most important place to start this whole conversation. Well, to understand the future of stimulus, you really have to get inside the heads of lawmakers and see what motivates them. And here's the hard truth: it's not our personal finances. The source material we're looking at puts this very, very bluntly. We can write letters, we can make calls, we can sign all the petitions in the world, but those things almost never move the needle. An economy that's tanking, though, oh yeah, that gets their attention immediately. The difference is just, it's night and day. Public pleas, for the most part, are treated as background noise, but a struggling economy, that's a 5-alarm fire. A stimulus check is basically treated like an energy drink for the entire system, something to jolt it back to life. The focus is on the system, not always the people inside it. Okay, so if a bad economy is the real trigger, what signs should we be looking out for? Well, according to our source, there are a few pretty big things that are all starting to happen at once, and they're raising some serious red flags. The first big warning sign is tariffs. It's a pretty simple chain reaction, right? Tariffs go up, which means the prices of goods go up. That means our money doesn't go as far. And what do we do when prices are high and things feel uncertain? We stop spending, we save our money, and when millions of people do that all at once, the whole economy feels the pain. Next up, the job market. And this one's fascinating because it's kind of getting hit with a double whammy. On one hand, you've got the classic slowdown. Businesses get nervous, they slow down hiring, they start letting people go. But layered on top of that is the absolute explosion of AI, which is automating and replacing jobs faster than a lot of people realize. And this number really puts the potential scale of the problem in perspective. Unemployment's been pretty low, right? But some reports are forecasting it could climb all the way up to 7%. A jump that big, that fast, that would be a massive shock to the system. And it doesn't even stop there. On top of all that, you've got the Federal Reserve keeping interest rates high to fight inflation. That makes everything, car loans, mortgages, business loans, way more expensive. So you've got this painful combo of high prices and high borrowing costs that are putting a major squeeze on everyone, from families to corporations. So When you put it all together, you've got the tariffs, you've got rising unemployment, you've got these high interest rates. The picture starts to get really clear. The source material says these things are all coming together to create a super high-risk situation, with the recession signals flashing, and I'm quoting here, so bright and red right now. Now, this is the crucial part. This isn't just some theory. We're not just guessing here. There is a very clear, very predictable pattern that plays out every time the economy gets into serious trouble. We've seen this movie before. Just look at this timeline. It lays out the playbook perfectly. 2001, the dot-com bubble bursts. And boom, they sent out checks. 2008, the great financial crisis hits. And what do? They send out checks. 2020, the whole world shuts down and they passed the biggest stimulus packages in history. A major economic crisis happens and lawmakers respond with cash. Every single time.
It just hammers home that core idea. The government's response to a recession has become a predictable, repeatable play. The details might change a little, but the strategy is always the same.
Okay, this brings us to what I think is the most important takeaway of this whole explainer. Instead of just waiting around for a news anchor to announce a stimulus check, you can actually watch the exact same economic signs that lawmakers and their advisors are watching. So here it is. This is your personal dashboard. It's really just 3 simple things. Step 1, keep an eye on that unemployment rate. If you see it start to spike, that's red flag number 1. Step 2, watch the data on consumer spending. If people suddenly slam the brakes on buying things, that's red flag number 2. And finally, step 3, monitor the GDP reports. If the economy officially shrinks, that is the main catalyst that has historically triggered a stimulus response. So, to put it as simply as I possibly can, the road to another stimulus check goes directly through a major economic crisis. It's not a proactive gift, it's a reactive emergency measure. The health of the overall economy is the one and really the only thing that matters in this whole equation. And that kind of leaves us with one final, bigger question to chew on, right? If the main tool in the toolbox for fixing our economy is a massive emergency injection of cash, well, what does that really say about the stability of the system itself? It's definitely something to think about as we watch these indicators in the months ahead. Have you been looking at your budget lately and just wondering how things are supposed to add up? Well, you're not alone. And right now, there are 2 massive financial proposals being talked about that could seriously change the game. We're talking about a potential $2,400 a year boost for Social Security recipients and a totally separate plan for $1,200 checks every single month. So let's dive in and break down what these ideas are all about. That's really the big question, isn't it? Could we actually see a huge jump in Social Security and other support programs? And look, we're not just talking about the usual small cost of living tweaks here. These are proposals for real substantial increases. One plan wants to beef up a system we already have, while the other wants to build something brand new. So what's really going on here? Why now? Let's get into it. So why all this talk all of a sudden? Well, it really just comes down to the incredible financial squeeze so many people are feeling. You know it, you've seen it, the economy's been all over the place, and folks on fixed incomes, seniors, people with disabilities, you name it, they've been hit the absolute hardest. It seems like lawmakers are finally starting to realize that the old solutions just aren't going to cut it anymore. For years now, there's been this growing gap. The official benefit increases, the COLs, they just haven't been keeping up with how much things actually cost. Some of the source material we looked at even called the recent raises pathetic. And you can see why when you look at the price of groceries or rent. That gap between what's coming in and what's going out is the huge problem these new proposals are trying to fix. Okay, so let's look at the first big idea on the table. This one is pretty direct, pretty straightforward. The plan is to take the Social Security system we all know and just give it a major raise right across the board. The goal here is simple. Get more money into the pockets of beneficiaries so they can actually deal with today's sky-high cost of living. It all boils down to this one number, an extra $2,400 per year. And what that really means is a permanent raise of $200 every single month. For households stretched to the absolute limit, that is a big deal. Now, this idea has actually popped up in a couple of different ways in Washington. On one side, you've got these big sweeping bills like the Social Security Expansion Act. That would make this $200 raise a permanent thing, lasting for like the next 75 years. But on the other hand, some have pitched it as more of a temporary emergency patch just to fight inflation. So the long-term goal might differ, but the core idea is exactly the same, a $200 monthly boost. All right, let's switch gears to the second proposal because this one is a whole different ballgame. Instead of boosting a program that's already there, this idea would create an entirely new kind of safety net. We're talking about ongoing $1,200 monthly checks. And the number here is pretty staggering, $1,200 every single month. That works out to $14,400 a year. And just to be clear, this is not a one-and-done stimulus check like we've seen before. The proposal is for a continuous, reliable payment month after month. It's a totally different philosophy of financial support. So what is this thing exactly? It's called a Guaranteed Basic Income, or GBI. The basic idea is to create a financial foundation for people, an income floor that nobody can fall below. It's all about giving people a baseline of stability that they can actually count on, especially when the economy is as unpredictable as it is today. The specifics for this plan come from a bill called the Support Act. It lays out pretty clear rules for who would get it. Basically, you'd receive the payments if your income was below a certain level, for example, under $75,000 for a single person. So it's really targeted at low and middle income Americans. And its whole purpose is to be that buffer, that safety net against big economic shocks. Okay, let's put these two side by side because the differences are really important. The $2,400 boost is for Social Security beneficiaries, period. It's about making their existing system better. The $1,200 GBI, on the other hand, is for a much wider group of people based on their income, and it's about creating a whole new system. But here's where it gets really fascinating, and the source material pointed this out. If both of these somehow passed, many Social Security recipients could actually be eligible for both. Think about it. Even with an extra $200 a month, their total income might still be low enough to qualify for the GBI checks. They could potentially get help from both programs. All right, so we've gone through these two really powerful ideas. It's easy to get excited. I get it. The numbers are huge. The potential is huge. But this is where we have to take a step back, take a deep breath, and talk about a very, very important reality check. We need to be clear about where these proposals actually stand today. This quote from the source material really says it all. And I want to be crystal clear with you. Neither of these plans, not the $2,400 Social Security increase, and not the $1,200 monthly checks, have been passed into law. They are proposals. They are bills being debated and discussed. The conversation is absolutely real, but these are not promises. They're not happening tomorrow. So you might be thinking, okay, if they're not laws yet, why are we even talking about them? That's a fair question, but the reason is the very fact that these huge ideas are being seriously discussed tells us something incredibly important about the challenges our country is facing. This isn't just about inflation right now. It's about massive, long-term changes happening in our economy. So what's pushing this conversation forward? Well, it's kind of a one-two punch. First, you've got the immediate pain of inflation that everybody is feeling at the checkout counter. But then you've got these huge, looming changes from technology. Things like AI and automation that are raising serious questions about what jobs will even look like in the future. Lawmakers see this coming. And, with real-world data from over 150 local GBI pilot programs all across the U.S., these aren't just wacky theories anymore. They're ideas that are actually being tested. And that leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? We're standing at this crossroads where the short-term pain of inflation is crashing into the long-term anxiety about technology. These two proposals are bold, ambitious answers to those challenges. They're a sign that the whole conversation is shifting, moving beyond little tweaks to really think about fundamentally changing our financial safety net. The question for all of us is, are these the kinds of answers we'll eventually land on? Well, only time will tell. But one thing feels pretty certain. Big changes are on the horizon.
Today, we're going to dig into some really fascinating source material that claims to reveal the real formula for a stimulus check. And here's a hint. It has almost nothing to do with what the public is asking for.
So let's just dive right in, shall we? The one question that seems to be on everyone's mind is, when are we getting another stimulus check? But here's the thing. According to the source material we're looking at, that might be the wrong question altogether.
So here's the big idea from our source. The path to a potential stimulus check isn't paved with petitions or phone calls or public pressure. Nope, the real answer, the one that actually makes things happen, is found by listening to the economy itself. It's all about understanding what forces lawmakers to act and what, well, doesn't.
The real story here is about what could actually trigger one down the road.
And this right here really gets to the heart of the argument. On one side, you've got public demand, people asking, even pleading for help. Our source says that, for the most part, gets ignored. But on the other side, you have an actual economic crisis, a real, measurable recession. When the economy itself sends out that kind of SOS, lawmakers, they respond, and they respond fast.
Wow. This direct quote from the source material, it really doesn't pull any punches, does it? The argument isn't that lawmakers are necessarily heartless, but that their main motivation for stimulus is all about macroeconomic stability, not so much individual welfare. You have to think of it this way. A stimulus check isn't a gift, it's a tool to fix a huge problem they absolutely do care about, a failing economy.
Okay, so if lawmakers are listening to the economy, what does its distress call actually sound like? Well, as it turns out, it's not some big mystery. Our source points to a pretty predictable set of indicators. To really get their response, you first have to understand the tool they use. The source uses this great analogy. Think of the economy as being sluggish, just not performing well. Well, the government can give it an energy drink called stimulus. It's basically an artificial injection of cash, and it's designed to get things moving again, to get people spending, and to prop up the whole system when it might be shrinking otherwise.
So what could actually push the economy to the brink where it needs that energy drink? Our source zeroes in on 3 critical warning signs. These are indicators that, if they start flashing red, could create the exact conditions needed for another round of stimulus.
All right, let's talk about warning sign number 1. And this one's a biggie, possibly the most immediate trigger, the impact of tariffs. The source uses some pretty strong language here, saying they could literally crush the economy. And while it might seem like an abstract topic, its effects are very, very real.
So here's how that chain reaction really works. First, tariffs go on imported goods, which means prices go up. We, the consumers, end up paying for that, which means our money doesn't go as far. So what do? We naturally pull back on spending to save a little more. Now, when one person does that, it's no big deal. But when millions and millions of us do it all at once, the ripple effect is huge, and it can lead to the entire economy contracting.
And making things even trickier is the second warning sign, the job market. You know, a healthy economy absolutely needs healthy employment. But our source argues that right now, jobs are getting squeezed from 2 different directions at the exact same time.
So on one hand, you've got this classic effect of a slowing economy. When businesses see demand start to fall, partly because of that tariff effect we just talked about, they stop hiring and, they start laying people off. But layered right on top of that is this very modern pressure from AI and automation, which are already starting to take over certain jobs. That combination, well, that creates a serious risk for a fast rise in unemployment.
And this really shows you what's at stake. While the unemployment rate today is still pretty healthy, the projections our source is looking at are, well, they're concerning. The rate could climb past 5.5%, or in a really extreme scenario, even push past 7%. And historically, numbers like that, they set off some major alarm bells in Washington.
And that brings us to the third and final warning sign our source highlights, and it has to do with the Federal Reserve's monetary policy, specifically the strategy of keeping interest rates high to fight inflation. Now that's intended to cool things down, but it also acts like a powerful brake on the entire economy.
And this isn't just some abstract economic policy. It hits everyone. For you and me, high interest rates make car loans, mortgages, and credit card debt way more expensive. For businesses, it gets more costly to borrow money to invest or to hire new people. So when you have that happening at the same time, tariffs are raising prices and the job market is getting weaker, well, you get a perfect storm of forces, all pushing the economy towards a big slowdown.
Okay, so you might be thinking this is all just a theory, right? Well, not exactly. The idea that these specific factors could lead to stimulus isn't just a guess. Our source argues it's a very well-established pattern. In fact, if you look back at recent history, you can see the exact same playbook being used again and again and again.
Just look at this timeline. It lays out the government's playbook perfectly. In 2001, after the dot-com bubble burst, boom, $300 stimulus checks. In 2008, during the Great Financial Crisis, boom, $600 stimulus checks. And in 2020, with the global pandemic shutdown, you remember it, multiple rounds of stimulus, starting at $1,200. The crisis is always a little different, but the response is remarkably consistent.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's not random. It's a formula. A major economic contraction has, time after time, led to the government pulling the same play from its toolkit, direct payments to people. They repeat the same play every time, and as you can see, the checks just tend to get bigger. Okay, so what can you do with all this information? Well, the really cool takeaway from our source material is that you don't have to just sit around and wait for some political announcement. You can actually become your own analyst. You can watch the exact same economic dashboard that lawmakers are watching.
Think of it like a recipe. Here are the 3 key ingredients in the stimulus formula you need to watch for. First, look for a catalyst, a trigger. Our source is betting on tariffs being not triggered this time around. Second, keep a really close eye on that unemployment rate. If you see it start to creep up steadily toward that 5.5% danger zone, that's a huge red flag. And third, just watch for broader signs that the economy is contracting. If you see these 3 things start to happen together, the chances of government action go up dramatically.
And really, this final quote from our source just says it all. The path to another stimulus check isn't paved with pleading, it's paved with economic pain. If we see a significant downturn, a major crash, as the speaker puts it, then the historical playbook tells us to get ready for a fast government response designed to, well, flood the system with cash.
And all of this leaves us with a really big, kind of provocative question. If this analysis is right, what does that say about our economic system? Does widespread financial help for everyday people only become a top priority when the entire economic house of cards is about to fall? It's a challenging thought for sure, and one that completely reframes the whole conversation.
Okay, so if you're on a fixed income, you've almost certainly heard the chatter about some potentially huge new benefits. Maybe you've seen something about a $2,400 raise or even $1,200 checks every month. Well, today we're going to cut through all that noise and explain exactly what these 2 big proposals are all about and what they could actually mean for you.
You know, this is really the question on everyone's mind right now, isn't it? Especially if you're a beneficiary of Social Security, SSDI, SSI, VA benefits, or railroad retirement. Prices for everything just keep going up, and it feels like benefits just can't keep pace. So what's really being talked about to fix this? Let's break down the 2 biggest ideas on the table. All right, let's dive right into Proposal 1. This idea is all about giving a boost to the benefits you're already getting. The best way to think about this is not as a one-time stimulus payment, but as a plan for a permanent raise to your monthly income. And the big number that's grabbing all the headlines? $2,400. That's the proposed boost for the entire year. And when you see it laid out like that, as one big number, you can really start to see the kind of impact that could have on a household budget over 12 months. So how does that $2,400 actually break down? Well, it's pretty simple. You're looking at a $200 raise every single month. Now, this idea has popped up in a couple of different ways. Sometimes it's talked about as a temporary fix, like an emergency inflation relief payment. But it's also a major piece of bigger bills, like the Social Security Expansion Act, which wants to make that $200 boost a permanent, indefinite thing. Okay, let's switch gears and talk about the second major idea that's out there. And, you know, this one is a completely different animal. We're not talking about just raising the benefits that already exist. This proposal is about building an entirely new payment program from the ground up. And wow, the number here is a big one. We're talking $1,200 paid out every single month. You can see right away how this is just a massive change in both the amount and the structure compared to that $200 boost we were just talking about. So what exactly is this idea for a $1,200 check? Well, it's a type of program called a Guaranteed Basic Income, or GBI for short. The whole concept here is to provide a reliable safety net, basically an income floor that people can count on with no strings attached to help them cover their basic needs. This specific plan was actually introduced in a bill called the Support Act. The goal was to create a GBI program that covers the entire country, focused on low-income individuals and families. And what's interesting is how broad the proposed eligibility is. We're talking about individuals who make up to $75,000 a year and married couples making up to $150,000 a year. That means a whole lot of people on fixed incomes would easily fall under those limits. Okay, this is super important. Let's put these 2 ideas side by side for a second, because you've got to understand they are not the same thing. On one side, you've got the $2,400 raise. That's a benefit increase. It's for people already on Social Security. On the other side, you've got the $1,200 checks. That's a brand new GBI program for a much wider group of low-income Americans. See the difference? They're both trying to solve financial problems, but they're using totally different game plans. So, that brings up a really big question, right? Why are we even talking about this stuff so seriously right now? What's happening in the world and in the economy that's pushing these massive ideas into the spotlight? Well, it really boils down to three main drivers here. First up, just intense economic pressure. Second, this feeling that the recent cost of living adjustments just haven't been enough. And third, people are looking ahead and trying to get ready for some major disruptions that are coming down the pike. So let's unpack that a little. First, there's just been this massive wave of inflation that's made it painfully clear that current benefits aren't keeping up with how much things actually cost. Some folks have even called the yearly cost of living adjustments, the COLAs, pathetic, arguing that they're just too small to really help. And then there's the future. The GBI idea especially is seen as a way to build a safety net before things like AI and automation potentially wipe out millions of jobs. All right, so we've covered the what and the why, but now we've reached what is, without a doubt, the most important part of this whole conversation. Where do things actually stand today? Are these ideas or are they law? And look, I want to be 100% crystal clear with you on this. The single most important thing to take away from our chat today is this. As of right now, neither of these proposals has been passed into law. These are ideas, they are being discussed, but they are not a reality. At least, not yet. So let me say that again, just to be sure it lands. What we've been talking about here are proposals. They're ideas, they are bills being debated and kicked around in Congress. They are not active programs, and no, there are no checks being sent out based on these ideas right now. This is all part of the process of making laws. But here's where it gets really interesting, because these are two totally separate programs with different rules. If, and it's a big if, but if both of them were to become law, most people on a fixed income would probably be eligible to get both at the same time. Think about that. The $200 raise to Social Security likely wouldn't be enough to push most people over the income limit for the $1,200 GBI payment. It's not an either-or situation. And all of this really leaves us with a massive question, doesn't it? As we stare down these huge economic shifts from inflation to automation, what we're really debating is the future of the financial safety net itself. What should it look like? Are big ideas like these the answer? That's the conversation that is going to shape our economy for many, many years to come. So what would it really take for another round of stimulus checks to be sent out? It is, without a doubt, a question on millions of people's minds. And you know what? The answer might be a lot closer than you think. Today, we're going to cut through all the noise and look at the real, concrete economic signals that could actually trigger that next wave of support. Look, this is the question, right? It's probably one of the most common questions being asked right now. And if you're wondering about it, you are definitely not alone. The fact that so many people are even asking tells its own story. A lot of folks are feeling the financial squeeze. But to find the real answer, we can't just look at our own finances. We have to look somewhere else entirely. And this is the fundamental idea we have to start with. A stimulus check, sure, it feels incredibly personal. It lands right in your bank account. But where it comes from? Not personal at all. You have to think of it like a giant emergency lever the government pulls when the entire economic engine of the country starts to stall. They're not trying to fix your personal budget. They're trying to fix the country's economy. Okay, let's really break this down because this gets right to the heart of everything. On one side, you have the common assumption, which makes total sense. People are hurting, they need help, so the government should help. It's logical. But on the other side, you have the economic reality. The government really only acts when the entire economy is in trouble, when it's shrinking, when it's heading for a recession. Those stimulus checks we get are really just a side effect of that much bigger problem. The economy is the patient, and the stimulus check is the emergency medicine. So if we're going to be economic detectives, watching for these signs of weakness, where do we look first? Well, there is one single report that stands head and shoulders above all the rest. It's the most important vital sign for the U.S. economy, and that is the monthly jobs report. Every first Friday of the month, this report drops, and it's basically a national health checkup. It's the biggest barometer we've got. Now, the unemployment rate, that's the headline number everyone talks about. But the details inside are what really tell the story. You see things like average hourly earnings. Are people's wages actually keeping up with prices? And maybe the most important one is the labor participation rate. That tells us if people are so discouraged that they've just given up looking for a job altogether. Put it all together and you get a really clear picture of whether the economy is creating jobs or losing them. I want you to just look at this number for a second. 1.8 million. It's a huge, huge figure. What in the world could that represent? Well, this number is the key to understanding why even tiny little changes in that jobs report have absolutely massive consequences. And there it is.
For every single percentage point the unemployment rate goes up, another 1.8 million people have lost their jobs. Just let that sink in. A headline might say unemployment ticked up by 0.1%. That sounds like nothing, right? But that tiny tick means 180,000 people are suddenly out of work. It's not just a statistic. It's a huge wave of disruption hitting families and towns all across the country. And that disruption, it doesn't stop there. This is where we see the snowball effect. It's what economists call a vicious cycle. You see, a weak job market isn't just a one-time thing. It's the start of a chain reaction that can pull the whole economy down. It starts out pretty slow, but believe me, it picks up speed really, really fast. Let's walk through this dangerous cycle. So first, the unemployment rate starts to climb. What happens next? Well, naturally, when people lose their paychecks, they stop spending money. So step 2, consumer spending falls. People put off buying that car or fixing the roof or even just eating out. Then, because customers aren't buying, businesses see their sales drop. So step 3, they contract. They cut back, they cancel plans, and eventually they have to do more layoffs. And that, of course, leads to step 4, pushing the unemployment rate even higher. You see how this works? The cycle just keeps feeding on itself, getting worse each time around. This quote just captures it perfectly. The government is watching this cycle gain speed and momentum. They know that once it really gets going, it's incredibly hard to stop. And that exact moment, when that cycle is threatening to spiral, that's when stimulus checks go from being a vague idea to an urgent plan. The whole point of a stimulus check is to jump right into step 2, to boost consumer spending and try to break that cycle before it gets any worse. So the jobs report is signal number 1 for sure. But there's another really crucial indicator that tells the same story: what the Federal Reserve is doing with interest rates. Watching the Fed gives us a peek behind the curtain at their private assessment of how the economy is really doing. It's really a tale of 2 different approaches. When the economy is running hot and growing fast, the Fed worries about inflation. So they raise interest rates to make borrowing money more expensive, which kind of cools everything down. But the opposite is also true. When the Fed starts cutting interest rates, that is a crystal clear signal that they think the economy is weak and needs a boost. They're making it cheaper to borrow money to try and get businesses and people spending again. And this brings us to a super important rule of thumb. When you see the Federal Reserve start aggressively cutting interest rates, even if officials are on TV saying the economy is strong, you need to pay attention to what they do, not what they say. Those rate cuts are a hidden signal. They're a quiet admission that behind the scenes, the data they're looking at is worrying enough to step in. They're trying to get ahead of a bigger problem. And this isn't just some abstract theory. This link between a weak economy and a big government response is a very well-established pattern. In fact, if you look back at every major recession we've had in recent memory, the playbook is remarkably consistent. I mean, the historical record here is undeniable. In 2001, after the tech bubble popped, boom, we got stimulus checks. In 2008, during the Great Financial Crisis, boom, stimulus checks. And in 2020, when the pandemic started, boom, we got multiple rounds of stimulus checks. Every single major economic downturn in the last 25 years has been met with the exact same response. It's just become a standard tool in the economic toolkit. This quote from one of the sources just says it all, doesn't it? The response is predictable. When the economy hits a major wall, rising unemployment, shrinking growth, the government and the Fed act. They cut interest rates and they send out money. History shows us this isn't really an if question anymore. It's a when question. Now, a lot of us think the government is just too slow to react. But when a real crisis hits, they can move with incredible speed. Let's just look at the example from late 2020. A stimulus bill was signed into law on December 28th. The very next day, December 29th, direct deposits were already starting to hit people's bank accounts. Within a week, almost everyone had their money. The point is, the system is already built. When they decide to turn on the faucet, the money can flow almost immediately. So, this really brings us to the ultimate takeaway. We need to shift how we think about this. The real question isn't if the government will do this again. History tells us they will. The real question is, what's the pain threshold? How bad does the economy have to get? How high does unemployment have to climb before they're finally forced to pull that lever one more time? By understanding these signals, the jobs report, what the Fed is doing, the historical pattern, you're now equipped to watch the economy for yourself. So the next time you see a headline about the unemployment rate ticking up, you'll know it isn't just a number, it's a signal. And the real question is, how many more of those signals will we need to see before action becomes inevitable?
This quote, it just hits home, doesn't it? It's a feeling so many people share. You wait all year for that cost of living adjustment, you're hoping it'll finally give you some breathing room, and then, poof, Rising costs have already eaten it up before you even get it. It's this incredibly frustrating cycle, and it's the exact problem that these proposals are trying to fix.
So, to make this all super clear, here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the financial squeeze that's making all of this so necessary. Then we'll get into two huge proposals for a Social Security lifeline. After that, we'll see the plan for fixing that annual raise. Then we'll cover some other really critical help that's on the table. And finally, we'll wrap it all up and talk about what this could really mean for you.
So, let's start right there with the core issue, the financial squeeze. I mean, why does it feel like you're running backwards, even when you technically get a raise every year? Well, the numbers, they tell a pretty clear story. This all comes down to something called purchasing power. And it's not about the dollar amount printed on your check. It's about what those dollars can actually buy. Losing 20% is, well, it's staggering. It means that the same amount of money that bought you 5 bags of groceries 10 years ago might only get you 4 bags today. It's this slow, quiet erosion of your money's value, and it's the big problem that really needs a solution.
And here is where you can see the problem in black and white. You might get, say, a 2.5% cost of living adjustment, your COLA, but then a huge, essential expense like your Medicare Part B premium can jump up by 6.6%. The math is simple, and it's brutal. When your biggest costs are rising almost 3 times faster than your income, you are losing ground. Every single year. It's exactly why so many people feel like they just can't catch a break.
So, the big question is, how do we fix this? Let's get into the first set of solutions. 2 major bills have been introduced in Congress that aim to provide a direct lifeline by seriously boosting Social Security payments. And we're not talking about minor tweaks here. These are substantial increases.
Okay, so the first one is called the Social Security Expansion Act. The 2 key words to focus on here are immediate and across the board. This isn't something you'd have to wait years for, and it's not something that only applies to a small group of people. The whole point is to provide universal, fast relief to fight back against inflation.
So what does that look like in real dollars? Well, the Act proposes a direct increase of $200. It's not a complicated percentage or a formula you have to figure out, just a flat, straightforward boost right in your monthly check.
And let's be crystal clear about this. This is not a one-time stimulus payment. We're talking about an extra $200 every single month. And this would apply to everyone receiving Social Security benefits. That includes retirement, disability, spousal, and survivor benefits. I mean, when you compare that to a recent COLA that might have only been about $40 or $50 for many people, you really see just how significant this is.
And if you zoom out and look at it over a full year, the impact is even bigger. An extra $200 a month? That adds up to $2,400 over the course of a year. For anyone on a tight budget, that kind of money isn't just helpful, it's transformational. That could be several months of prescriptions paid for. It could cover an unexpected car repair. Or it could simply mean less stress and not having to choose between paying the utility bill or buying groceries.
Okay, so that's the first big proposal. Now, the second one is called the Social Security 2100 Act. While the Expansion Act is for everybody, this one is much more targeted. It's designed as a real lifeline for the people who are struggling the most, the folks who are currently getting the absolute minimum Social Security benefit. And the increase being proposed here, it is massive. This act would provide a $660 increase. For those on the lowest rung of the Social Security ladder, an amount like this, it's not just helpful, it's absolutely life-changing. It's a direct injection of funds aimed squarely at the most financially vulnerable people.
So, what's the logic behind that $660 number? Well, it has a very specific goal, to lift recipients up to 125% of the federal poverty level. See, there are many seniors out there getting a check for around $900 a month, just trying to scrape by. This permanent increase is designed to give them not just a little relief, but a real measure of financial stability and dignity. Okay, so those were the big, immediate boosts to your check. But what about fixing that underlying problem? You know, the annual raise that never seems to be enough? Well, that brings us to the second major type of proposal, creating a stronger, more reliable cost of living adjustment, or COLA.
The proposed solution is actually pretty simple. Set a new baseline. So while a recent COLA might have been 2.5%, one proposal would establish a minimum COLA of 3.5%. That word minimum is the key. It means your annual adjustment could never, ever fall below that number. It would create a protective floor, a safety net, to make sure your benefits have a much better chance of actually keeping up with real-world inflation.
Now, beyond direct cash payments, there are also some really crucial proposals on the table to help with 2 of the most fundamental needs we all have: food and health.
These changes are designed to address some very specific frustrations and gaps in the current system.
This proposal takes on two major frustrations with the food stamp program, also known as SNAP. First up is the minimum payment. Right now, the minimum is just $23 a month, which, let's be honest, often doesn't even feel worth the paperwork. The idea is to raise that to $75, which would provide much more meaningful help. Second is the asset limit. The current limit can disqualify you for having as little as $4,500 in savings, basically penalizing you for having a small emergency fund. The proposal would more than double that limit to $10,000.
So, why make these specific changes? Well, the goal is pretty straightforward: to encourage more people to get the help that they're already entitled to. The estimates are kind of shocking. About 5 million seniors are eligible for food stamps, but they don't apply. And it's often because the benefit seems too small, or they're afraid of being penalized for the modest savings they've worked their whole lives for. These proposals are designed to get rid of those barriers.
Okay, we have covered a lot of ground and a lot of different numbers, so let's pull it all together right now and just summarize what this collection of proposals could tangibly mean for you and for your finances.
So let's just recap the biggest proposals on the table. We've got a potential $200 per month universal boost to Social Security, a massive $660 monthly increase for those on the minimum benefit, a guaranteed floor of 3.5% for your annual raise, and a more substantial minimum food stamp benefit of $75. Put it all together, and you see a multifaceted approach to providing real, tangible financial relief.
You know, at the end of the day, these proposals go way beyond just dollars and cents. They're about providing security and dignity and peace of mind. All of these bills are currently being debated, and they represent a potential future with a lot more financial breathing room, which really just leaves us with one final thought to consider for yourself.
Today, we're diving into a really huge idea that's being debated for the future of Social Security. We're talking about a proposal that could completely reshape the monthly checks for millions of people. And believe it or not, it all comes down to just one number: $1,304. Now, that is not some random figure pulled out of a hat. This is the heart of a major proposal for a new monthly minimum benefit for every single person on Social Security. So what would that actually mean? Who would it help? And the big one, could it even work? Come on, let's break it all down.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the problem, why this idea is even on the table. Then we'll get into the weeds of the 1304 proposal itself. We'll look at two very different ways it could work, tackle that giant funding question, and then wrap up with a reality check on where things really stand today.
Okay, so let's jump right in. To really get why a number like $1,304 is such a big deal, we have to first understand the pretty stark reality that a lot of people in Social Security are facing every single day. Yeah, just look at that number, 10.8 million. That's how many people receiving Social Security benefits are living below the poverty line. And get this, that's often after you count any other income they might have. So this right here, this is the core problem that is people scrambling for a really big solution.
So this federal poverty line isn't just some abstract idea. It's a hard number. For 2025, it's pegged at $15,650 a year for a single person. And if you pull out your calculator and divide that by 12 months, yep, you get $1,304 a month. That figure is the absolute rock bottom minimum the government says you need for necessities, and it's at the very center of this whole debate.
And that leads us right to the proposal itself. I mean, the logic is pretty straightforward, right? If we know millions of people are living below this very specific income level, the idea being floated is simple. Why not just use Social Security to fix it directly?
So the heart of the idea is to create a brand new, hard floor for benefits. It's pretty simple. No matter your work history, no matter how much you paid in, your monthly Social Security check would never be less than the poverty line. It would basically be a guarantee. Now, to see just how massive a change this would be, you gotta see what the current minimum looks like.
No, that is not a typo. Believe it or not, the current special minimum benefit can be as low as $50 a month. 50. I mean, that barely gets you a full tank of gas, let alone a week's worth of groceries. It provides almost no real security, and that's the basement level we're starting from. So the idea is to go from a minimum of maybe $50 to a minimum of over $1,300. That isn't just a small tweak, that's a seismic shift. For anyone at the lowest end of the benefit scale, this would be absolutely life-altering. But, and you knew there was a but coming, this is where it all gets a little more complicated. Agreeing that $1,304 sounds good is one thing. Figuring out how to actually do it is way harder. And right now, there are two really different visions for how it could be done. Okay, so on one side, you have the minimum benefit approach. Think of it like a safety net. If your current benefit is, say, $900 a month, this plan would boost it up to $1,304. Simple. But if you're already getting $1,800, nothing changes for you. It just helps the lowest earners. Now, on the other side is the much more radical flat benefit idea. This would set everyone's benefit, no matter who you are, to exactly $1,304. So that person at $900 goes up, but the person getting $1,800, their benefit would actually get cut. And that flat benefit approach, wow, that would fundamentally transform the entire system. For its whole history, Social Security has been based on this idea. What you get out is linked to what you paid in. A flat benefit would completely sever that link. It would basically turn Social Security into a guaranteed basic income for more than 70 million Americans, where everybody gets the exact same check. And this is why that flat benefit idea is, well, so controversial. Sure, it would be a huge help to people at the very bottom, but it would mean a massive pay cut for millions of others. Right now, the average retirement benefit is just under $2,000 a month. So under a flat benefit plan, the average retiree would suddenly see their payment drop by nearly $700. Can you imagine telling people who planned their entire retirement around a certain income that it's about to be slashed? Yeah, the political opposition would be enormous, which is why most people see this version as pretty much a non-starter. So let's put that flat benefit idea aside for a second and just focus on the more popular version, just lifting up the lowest earners. Even with that more modest plan, we still slam into the biggest question of all. How in the world do you pay for it? Yeah, this is the multi-trillion-dollar question. Raising benefits for millions of people isn't free. It would cost a staggering amount of money, and right now, nobody really agrees on where that money should come from. It's almost always the hardest part of the puzzle to solve. Well, one idea that gets thrown around is to look at the Social Security Trust Fund itself. It's got about $2.7 trillion in it, but it's invested super conservatively, so it's only getting back about a 2.4% return. Some people argue that if we invested that money a little more strategically, we could generate billions more in revenue without raising taxes on anybody. But of course, a strategy like that comes with a whole new set of risks and a whole lot of heated debate. So, after all this talk about poverty lines, different visions, and where to find the money, where do things actually stand today? It's really important we do a reality check on whether any of this is actually close to happening. And the honest-to-goodness reality is that right now, these are all just ideas. There are a ton of proposals floating around Washington, but there isn't one single piece of legislation that has broad support. You know, a lot of observers say the concerning thing isn't just that this specific plan isn't moving forward, but that there's no unified plan for the future of Social Security at all. So what's the most important thing to take away from all this? Well, even if the $1,304 plan doesn't become law tomorrow, the fact that we're even having this conversation is huge. It tells us that the debate around Social Security is changing. The focus is starting to shift from seeing it as just a retirement program to seeing it as a powerful tool we could use to fight poverty head-on and provide a real financial safety net. And that really leaves us with this one fundamental question. For decades, we've thought of Social Security as an earned benefit. You work, you pay in, and you get it back. But should its main purpose evolve? Should its number one job be to make sure no senior, no person with a disability has to live in poverty, no matter what they earned in the past? The answer to that question is going to define the future of Social Security for generations to come. You know, there's a question that just keeps popping up, and I see it everywhere. Are we going to get a fourth stimulus check? It's a huge topic online, and honestly, for very good reason. So today, we're going to cut through all that noise and really look at what the economy itself is telling us. So let's just get right to it. This is the question on everybody's mind. And listen, while there's tons of speculation out there, the real answer isn't buried in some political headline. Nope. It's found in the economic data. And that's not an exaggeration. We're talking about this today because for millions of people who are really feeling the financial squeeze, this isn't just some abstract idea. It's a very real daily concern. So let's try to get some real clarity. All right, here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with what actually triggers these payments. Then we'll look at a pretty surprising pattern from the past. After that, we'll zero in on the one economic number you need to keep an eye on. And finally, we'll talk about why the next stimulus might look totally different from the last one. Okay, first things first. What actually causes a stimulus check to happen in the first place? It's not random, and it's not just politics. It is a direct, calculated response to one specific event, an economy that's gotten sick. And when we say the economy is sick, we're really talking about a recession. That's the official word for it, right? A major, widespread, and kind of prolonged downturn that hits everything and everyone, from big corporations to your local coffee shop. And this right here is the core idea we need to understand. If you just look back at the last couple of decades, the pattern is crystal clear. Every single major recession has been followed by stimulus checks. Every single time. It's basically become a standard move in the modern economic playbook. Here's a great way to think about it. Imagine the economy is a patient. A recession? That's when the patient gets seriously ill. The lawmakers are the doctors, and their go-to prescription is a big old injection of cash. That's the stimulus, to try and get the patient back up and running. And it makes sense, right? The sicker the patient, the bigger the dose of medicine they're going to need. So let's dig into that history a little bit, because when you actually examine the numbers from past recessions, well, a really fascinating and maybe even predictive pattern starts to show up. Okay, check this out. Back in 2001, after the dot-com bubble burst, the check was for $300. Then in 2008, during that massive financial crisis, it doubled to $600. And then in 2020, with the pandemic, it doubled again to $1,200. Are you seeing the pattern here? Now, if you just follow that doubling logic, the next number in that sequence would be around $2,400. But, and I have to be super clear about this is just an observation of a historical trend. It is absolutely not a guarantee. The actual amount of any future check would depend completely on how severe the economic downturn is at the time. So if a sick economy is the trigger, how do we know when it's sick enough for the doctors to step in? Well, there's one key health report that we can all look at. It comes out on the first Friday of every single month, and it's simply called the jobs report. And inside this report, there are a few vital signs. You've got the headline number, the unemployment rate. But just as important is jobs created or lost. Are companies hiring, or are they laying people off? The labor participation rate tells us how many people are even trying to find a job. And average hourly earnings shows if our paychecks are keeping pace with inflation. Altogether, they paint a pretty clear picture of our economic health. So when you start to see that businesses, from the giant corporations all the way down to your local pizzeria, are slowing down their hiring, or worse, starting to let people go, that is a massive warning flare for the whole economy. It means people aren't spending as much, companies are getting nervous, and the whole economic engine is starting to sputter. That is the signal that gets lawmakers to scramble and start seriously talking about what they need to do. But, and this is really important, if they do act again, there's a good chance it won't be a carbon copy of last time. The whole strategy could shift to something much more targeted. See, the last few checks were broad. They went out to a massive chunk of the population. A targeted strategy is different. It would focus laser-like on low-income and fixed-income households. Why? Because those are the folks most likely to spend the money immediately and pump it right back into the economy. This gives you way more bang for your buck, and it does it with less risk of driving up inflation for everybody else. So the big takeaway here is this. We might need to adjust our expectations. If and when another stimulus package comes along, it could be designed very, very differently. Maybe aimed at a smaller group of people to get the maximum economic impact with the fewest negative side effects. Okay, so let's just trace that path one more time. It starts with an economic contraction. We see it in those bad jobs reports. That triggers the lawmakers' scramble, where they have to respond. Then a stimulus package is passed, and finally, the payments are distributed with one single goal: to get spent right away and kickstart the economy. So that brings us to the final thought. Based on modern history, it really doesn't seem to be a matter of if the government will intervene in the next major recession. The real question is, how sick does the economy have to get before they open up that playbook once again? That's what we'll all be watching.
Okay, so you've probably seen this number making the rounds online. A massive 20.3% raise for Social Security beneficiaries. I mean, it's the kind of number that sounds incredible, almost too good to be true, right? It could be absolutely life-changing for millions, but where did it even come from? Is it a real proposal? Is it some kind of back payment plan? Or is it just a big misunderstanding? Today, we are going to get to the bottom of it. We're going to decode that number and figure out what it really means.
And that brings us to the big question, the one that's on everybody's mind. Is a 20.3% raise for Social Security actually on the table for 2025? It's a really powerful idea, especially with how expensive everything has gotten for folks on a fixed income. Before we break it all down, just take a second and think, what would a raise that big mean for you? For your monthly budget, your peace of mind, your ability to just handle things? It's a powerful thought. So let's dig in and find out what's really going on here.
So let's turn that percentage into actual dollars, because that's what really matters. For the average SSI beneficiary, we're talking about an extra $200 per month. Think about that for a second. That's not just a number. That's a full tank of gas and groceries, or a utility bill paid off with less stress.
Now, for SSDI beneficiaries, that number jumps even higher to an extra $300 a month. I mean, that's a really significant boost that could help cover things like medical copays or just give you a little bit of breathing room in your budget.
And for the average retired worker, the increase would be even bigger, about $380 more every single month. If you stretch that out over a year, that's nearly $4,600. So yeah, it is no wonder a number like 20.3% got everyone's attention. It's huge.
With figures like these, you have to ask, is this for real? Is it a real possibility? Well, to find out, we have to understand where that 20.3% number actually came from in the first place.
Okay, this is the key to the whole story. That 20.3% didn't just appear out of thin air. It's actually rooted in real data from the Social Security Administration. But, and this is a big but, it's the interpretation of that data that's caused all this excitement and confusion. So let's peel back the layers and actually look at the math behind the headline.
All right, let's dive in and really deconstruct this number. In this section, we're going to trace that 20.3% right back to its source. And, spoiler alert, it is not a proposed bill for a new raise, and it's not a retroactive payment plan that's being debated in Congress. The truth is actually a lot simpler, and it has everything to do with the cost of living adjustments. You know, the COLAs that have already been paid out.
So here's where it comes from. It's actually simple math. If we look at the official cost of living adjustments over the last few years, in 2022, we got a 5.9% raise. Then in 2023, that huge 8.7% increase. For 2024, it was 3.2%. And if we add a projected 2.5% for 2025, what do you get when you add all that up? You got it, exactly 20.3%.
And that's the big aha moment right there. The 20.3% figure is not a new proposal for a one-time check. It is the cumulative total of the annual COLA increases from 2022 all the way through the projection for 2025. It's a way of measuring how much benefits have already gone up during a period of really high inflation. So it's not a future promise, it's more like a look in the rearview mirror.
But that raises a really important question. If 20.3% is just the sum of old raises, why is everyone talking about back pay? Well, the answer is in the gap between those official COLA numbers and the reality of what things actually cost.
And this right here, this is the heart of the issue. While benefits have gone up by that 20.3% over 4 years, just look at what's happened to prices. The cost of groceries has jumped somewhere between 22 and 25% in that same time. And utilities like electricity and gas, whoa, that increase is staggering, anywhere from 28 to as high as 40%. It's plain to see the official raises just haven't kept up.
And you know, the financial pressure doesn't just stop with food and utilities. The cost of shelter, whether it's rent or a mortgage, has just skyrocketed. And medical expenses have seen a huge jump too. We're talking higher copays every time you see a doctor and rising premiums for insurance. When you put it all together, it's pretty clear that even with that 20.3% cumulative raise, the actual purchasing power of your benefit has gone down.
So, this all leads to the next logical question. If there's such a clear gap between the COLAs and the actual cost of living, why not just pass a law to give everyone a retroactive payment to make up for it? That's the whole idea behind this back pay concept. But, as good as it might sound, there are some pretty big political and financial hurdles that make a plan like that extremely unlikely to ever happen.
Let's just walk through the reality here. First, any kind of payment like this would need a brand new law passed by both the House and the Senate. That's a huge challenge right there. The president can't just sign an executive order and make it happen. Plus, and this is a really big one for lawmakers, pumping that much cash into the system would make Social Security's financial problems happen a lot sooner. And finally, it's just important to know that while there's a lot of talk, there is no actual bill in Congress for this 20.3% back pay idea.
You know, even though this whole 20.3% conversation is based on a misunderstanding, it serves a really important purpose. It's shining a bright light on a much bigger, much more urgent debate. Is the current Social Security system, especially the way it calculates raises, still adequate for the financial realities that we're all facing today?
This quote really gets to the heart of why this matters so much. For most people, getting these benefits, this isn't just some extra spending money. This is their income. It's what they depend on for most, if not all, of their budget each month. That's why these discussions are so critical. We're talking about the primary financial lifeline for tens of millions of Americans.
So ultimately, that's what this all boils down to. The 20.3% figure that went viral, it isn't a real proposal, but it has become a powerful symbol. It represents the very real frustration and the financial squeeze felt by millions of people whose official cost of living adjustments are falling further and further behind their actual cost of living. It's a symptom of a much larger debate we need to have.
And this brings us to our final and maybe the most important question. This whole 20.3% debate has made one thing crystal clear. There's a major disconnect between the formula and reality. So as the cost of everything, housing, food, healthcare, keeps climbing, how can the Social Security system evolve? What changes are needed to make sure that these benefits provide not just a safety net, but a real foundation for a dignified life? That is the real conversation this viral number has forced all of us to have.
So today we're going to unpack the really complex economic signals that could trigger future government relief. What actually has to happen in the economy for stimulus to even be on the table? Let's find out. You know, the question of another stimulus check, it's on a lot of people's minds. And it's not just some abstract economic debate, right? It's driven by very real everyday financial pressures that struggle to pay the rent, buy groceries, and just cover the bills. We see these concerns everywhere. So we're going to break down the actual mechanics behind any potential government action. All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to tackle that big stimulus question head on. Then we'll look at what an economy in distress actually looks like. We'll explore a pretty innovative idea for automatic relief. We'll pinpoint why unemployment is the main trigger. And then finally, we'll give you the key signs that you can watch for yourself. Okay, so first things first. Before we dive into the how and the why, let's just set the record straight on where things actually stand right now. Let's just cut right to the chase. The single most important thing to know is this. As of this moment, no new stimulus check has been passed into law. Now, while there's a ton of conversation and speculation out there, nothing has been officially approved by lawmakers. And, you know, that leads to a really crucial point. Stimulus payments are not random acts of government generosity. They are a very specific tool. Think of it like an emergency brake that only gets pulled when the economy is in real, serious trouble. The health of the economy is the one and only prerequisite. So what does that economic weakness even mean? What does it look like? Well, it's almost never just one bad number. It's more like a chain reaction, you know? A whole series of dominoes just falling one after another. Let's trace that path. And this slide right here shows that chain reaction perfectly. It all kicks off when people like you and me spend less money. That, of course, means less revenue for businesses, which forces them to cut costs. And often that means layoffs. This rising joblessness is the most visible sign of distress, and it's that final domino that really pressures lawmakers to step in. You know, there's this quote that just perfectly captures the speed of a downturn. Building an economy is often the slow, methodical climb up the stairs. But a recession? Oh, that's the express elevator straight down. Fear and contraction, they just spread so much faster than confidence and growth. Now, I know the word recession can sound pretty scary, right? But from a purely economic view, it's actually a natural part of the business cycle. It's not necessarily a flaw, but more of a big old reset. It can be a painful process for sure, but sometimes it's what clears out the old stuff and sets the stage for the next period of growth. So when the economy takes that elevator ride down, how does the government actually respond? Well, the typical way is slow and very political. But let's explore a fascinating, much more streamlined idea that was proposed a few years back. Okay, so on the left, you've got the usual way things work. A crisis hits, and bam, lawmakers are scrambling. They debate, they argue, and eventually they try to pass these massive, complex bills like the CARES Act. It can be a really slow, politically charged process. But on the right is a totally different idea. What if the response was just built in? What if it was automatic? And this is the whole idea behind what economists call automatic stabilizers. Just think of it like a pre-programmed system with a simple if-then rule. If the unemployment rate goes up and hits a specific predetermined level, then a payment is automatically triggered and sent out to people. No debate, no scramble, just an immediate response based on real-time data. But here's the reality check. As cool and efficient as this whole if-then system sounds, it's important to remember it was only ever a proposal. The legislation was introduced, but it never actually passed into law. So our current system is still the reactive manual one, not the automatic one. So if relief isn't triggered automatically, what is the one signal that lawmakers and economists are all watching? Let's zoom in on that main trigger.
It really boils down to one number more than any other, the unemployment rate. And why is that? Well, because it gives us the clearest, broadest snapshot of the entire economy's health. It's like the 30,000-foot view, you know? It tells us directly how many people are out of work, which tells us how businesses are doing on a massive scale.
And that one number, it tells two completely different stories about the country. In a strong economy, low unemployment means businesses are confident, they're hiring, people feel secure enough to spend. But in a weak economy, rising unemployment signals that businesses are cutting jobs to survive, and consumers, feeling that uncertainty, start to pull back on their spending. And here's the reason why layoffs happen so darn fast during a downturn. For the vast majority of businesses out there, their single biggest bill is payroll. It's paying their people. So when their revenues drop, like we saw in that domino effect, they have to make some really tough choices to stay afloat. And cutting headcount is often the first and most significant lever they can pull. That's the direct link between shrinking consumer spending and rising unemployment. So let's bring it all together and build our own economic dashboard. If you want to know which way the winds are blowing for yourself, these are the key numbers you got to follow. First up, of course, is that unemployment rate we've been talking so much about. But you also want to watch weekly jobless claims. Think of this as a real-time alarm bell for new layoffs. Third, the labor force participation rate. This basically asks how many people have just given up looking for a job entirely. A falling number there is about sign. And finally, average hourly earnings. This one's simple. Are people's paychecks growing or shrinking? Together, these four numbers paint a really clear picture. So at the end of the day, the takeaway is really simple. Stimulus isn't about politics. It's not about petitions. It's all about the data. A significant, sustained weakening of the economy, confirmed by the indicators we just talked about, is the one and only catalyst that puts government relief back on the table, which leaves us with one final, bigger question to chew on. We've talked about these downturns as a painful part of the cycle, but are they a fundamental flaw in how our economy is designed? Or are these big old resets a necessary, albeit difficult feature that ultimately allows for new growth and opportunity to come out on the other side? That's something to ponder. So there's a lot of talk right now about a new proposal for a $600 payment, right? And, it's raising a ton of questions. So today, we're going to cut through all that noise and give you the real answers, straight from the source. Okay, so here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll cover the basics of what this proposal even is. Then we'll get into the numbers, who gets paid, how much. After that, we're going to tackle some of the biggest questions people are asking, see what kind of hurdles it's facing in Congress, and then wrap it all up with what you really need to know. All right, first things first. What exactly is this American Worker Rebate Act? So the big thing everyone's talking about is this proposed payment of at least $600. And yeah, the official language calls it a rebate, but let's be real. For all intents and purposes, it's set up to work a lot like those stimulus checks we've seen before. And just so we're all on the same page, the official name is the American Worker Rebate Act of 2025. It was introduced in the Senate by Josh Hawley, who's a Republican senator from Missouri. Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. Where is the money actually coming from? Well, this isn't about printing more cash. The idea here is to frame it as a kind of profit share. Basically, giving Americans a direct slice of the money the government brings in from tariffs. All right, let's get to the question everyone really cares about, right? How much money are we talking about, and who would actually get it? Okay, so the proposal calls for a payment of at least $600, and that's for every single qualifying adult. And get this, it's not just for adults. That same $600 amount would also go out for each dependent, so that could add up pretty quickly for families. Now, of course, there are income limits. To get the full amount, if you're filing as an individual, you'd need to make $75,000 or less. For married couples, that number doubles to $150,000. If you make more than that, the payment starts to phase out, so you get a smaller amount. Whenever a proposal like this drops, it just naturally creates a ton of questions, and honestly, a bit of confusion. So let's take a minute and clear up some of the most common things people are asking. Okay, this is probably the biggest one we've seen. People see the word worker right there in the title and, they immediately think, oh no, I don't have a job. Does that mean I'm out? It's a totally fair question. So let's just clear this up right now. The simple answer is no. That word worker in the title, it's just part of the name. It is not an eligibility requirement. The whole point of the bill is to be inclusive, no matter what your job situation is. All right, the next big question comes from folks on fixed or low incomes. Think about retirees, people on Social Security. A lot of them don't usually file a tax return every year. So the big question is, how would they get this payment? The answer is all about how the payment is structured. See, it's set up as something called a refundable tax credit. And I know that sounds like tax jargon, but that phrase is super important for understanding why you could still get the money, even if you don't file.
Okay, let me break this down. A non-refundable credit is pretty simple. It can only lower the taxes you owe. If you don't owe any taxes, you get $0. It can't go below zero. But a refundable credit, which is what this proposal is a total game changer. It means that even if your income is zero, even if you owe zero in taxes, the Treasury will still cut you a check for the full amount. It's actual cash in your pocket.
Okay, now for a really important reality check. We have to remember, this is all still just a proposal, right? It's not a done deal. So what actually needs to happen for this thing to become law? Well, it's cleared the very first hurdle. The bill has been formally introduced in the Senate, which means it's an official piece of legislation now. But, and this is a big but, it still has a really long journey ahead. It's got to go through the entire legislative process before it could ever be passed and signed into law. So how could it actually pass? Well, one way is for it to be debated all on its own as a standalone bill. But what's probably more likely for something like this is that it gets attached to a bigger, must-pass piece of legislation, something like the federal budget or a big reconciliation bill. It's actually a pretty common strategy in Washington to get things like this through Congress. All right, let's pull all this together. What are the key takeaways you really need to remember about this proposal? So to recap, here's the deal. We're talking about a proposal for a $600 payment. It's a refundable credit, which is key. It's meant to cover both adults and their dependents as long as you're under the income limits. That's $75K for singles, $150K for couples. Super important. Your job status or whether you file taxes does not disqualify you. And the biggest thing to remember, it's still just a proposal. It has to pass Congress to become real. And that really leaves us with the big question, doesn't it? The proposal is officially on the table. We can see the different ways it might move forward. But as it makes its way through the maze of Washington politics, the real test is going to be whether it can get enough political momentum to actually cross the finish line. For now, it's an idea, just waiting for its moment.
Remember those stimulus checks we all got a few years back? For some people, they were an absolute lifeline. For others, well, they were a nice little bonus. A really fascinating new study is asking a powerful question. What if we could have gotten a much, much bigger economic boost, but for a fraction of the cost? The answer, it turns out, lies in getting the money to the right people and doing it in a totally different way. So let's break down this idea for what might just be a smarter stimulus.
Okay, so let's get right to the heart of it. The proposal this study makes is for a recurring $2,000 monthly check. But wait, this isn't some money for everyone idea. Not at all. The entire strategy really hinges on who gets this check, and the data suggests that being super precise is the key to making it all work.
So to really get to the bottom of this, we're going to walk through 4 key parts. First, we'll look back at the stimulus dilemma from 2020 and 2021. Then, we'll uncover a key economic clue that is absolutely central to this new idea. After that, we'll compare the economic impact of spenders versus savers. And finally, we'll explore all the details of this proposal for a smarter stimulus.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the stimulus dilemma. To figure out where we might be going, we first have to really understand where we've been. So let's take a look back at the lessons we learned from that last big round of stimulus payments.
So between 2020 and 2021, the government pushed out 3 big waves of stimulus checks, and the total price tag? A pretty staggering $850 billion. That's more than the entire economy of some countries. The whole goal was to jumpstart our economy, but a price tag that big raises a really important question. Did that money actually get spent in the right places, or did we kind of miss the mark?
Well, here were the core problems with that old approach. The checks went out to about 85% of the population. That means a huge chunk of that money went to people who, frankly, didn't really need it for their immediate expenses. Economists have a name for this. They call it the helicopter approach, just kind of dumping money across the landscape and hoping for the best. And the result? Well, not only was it super inefficient, but some studies suggest it added about 3 percentage points to the inflation that came later. There just had to be a better way.
And that leads us right into our second section, a key economic clue. See, researchers who are analyzing all this data found a secret to making stimulus way more effective. And it all comes down to understanding one simple but really powerful economic principle.
That principle is called the marginal propensity to consume, or MPC.
Now, don't let the name fool you. It sounds really academic, but it's an incredibly simple idea. It just measures one thing. When you get an extra dollar, how much of it do you actually spend and how much do you save? That's the whole concept right there.
Let's just boil it all the way down. Forget the jargon for a second. NPC is really just asking this one simple question. How likely are you to spend the next dollar you get? That's it. And this simple question, it turns out, is the key to unlocking a much more effective stimulus strategy.
So this concept basically creates two very distinct groups of people. You've got folks with a high MPC. They're typically on lower incomes, so an extra dollar is very likely to be spent immediately on necessities. Then you have people with a low MPC. They're usually on higher incomes, so that extra dollar is way more likely to be saved or invested. Simply put, the less of a financial cushion you have, the more likely you are to spend new money right away. And that distinction, well, it changes everything.
Okay, so let's move on to Section 3 and see how this all connects. Spenders versus savers. Now that we understand what MPC is, let's actually apply it. Let's follow the money and see what happens when we give the same amount of cash to people on opposite ends of that spectrum.
Let's use that core member from the study, $2,000. Now, imagine two of these checks are sent out. One goes to a spender, someone with a high MPC. The other one goes to a saver, someone with a low MPC. The amount of money is exactly the same, but where it goes next tells two completely different stories about the economy.
The data for the person with the high MPC is pretty striking. When this person gets that $2,000, the vast majority of it, about $1,600, is spent within just 10 days. The rest of it, gone within a month. This means the entire amount gets injected directly back into the economy, buying groceries, paying rent, supporting local businesses. This is stimulus in its absolute purest form.
And you know, this is the perfect time for a little reality check. The whole purpose of a stimulus check is right there in the name, to stimulate. It's not designed to be a savings plan or a debt reduction tool. Its only job is to get money moving through the economy, to keep everything going. Spending isn't a side effect of the program, it's the entire point.
So what happens when that same $2,000 check goes to a person with a low MPC, the saver? Well, the study found that they generally don't spend much of it at all. That money gets saved, or invested, or used to pay down a mortgage. From an economic stimulus perspective, that money is effectively taken right out of circulation. The source uses this great analogy. It's hoarded like a bunch of squirrels saving away nuts for the winter. And while saving is an amazing personal habit, it totally defeats the purpose of an economic stimulus.
So the crucial point is this. When the whole goal is to kickstart the economy, the government isn't looking for savers. It's looking for spenders. It needs people who will take that money and immediately put it right back into the system. And this is why that distinction between high and low MPC isn't just some academic theory. It's the absolute key to making a program like this work.
And this brings us to our final section, a smarter stimulus. Based on everything we've just laid out, the study proposes a completely different, much more targeted approach for the next time a major economic downturn happens. So here's the proposed model. Step 1, instead of that blanket helicopter approach, you surgically identify only the high MPC individuals. Step 2, you replace the one-off check with a sustained monthly payment. And the result is this amazing 1-2 punch. You get way more economic stimulation for every single dollar you spend, and you avoid that massive $850 billion price tag of the old method.
The benefits of this kind of model are really clear. The money goes directly to the people who need it the most and who will actually go out and spend it. This gives you a much bigger economic bang for your buck at a fraction of the total cost. And maybe the biggest shift here is moving from that one-time payment to sustained support, replacing what one person called a payment that was cool for 3 minutes with a predictable lifeline that can last for months.
So this all brings us to the final question. This model suggests we can have a stimulus that is cheaper, more effective, and much more targeted to the people who need help. It's a really powerful idea, and it's backed by a lot of data. The real question is, when the next economic crisis hits, will policymakers stick with that old helicopter approach, or will they be willing to embrace a smarter, more precise strategy? What we learned from the last crisis might just be the key to navigating the next one.
What if, instead of sending checks to almost everyone, we sent out fewer checks but made them way more powerful? We're talking about ongoing, monthly payments, but, and this is the key part, only for a very specific group of people. Let's get into it. All right, first up, let's just take a second and think back to 2020 and 2021. Remember those 3 big stimulus checks? A lot of us got them, and for some people, they were an absolute lifeline. But the big question this new report is asking is, was that really the best way to do it? Could we have gotten a bigger economic bang for our buck, with fewer negative side effects?
So the approach back then was, well, it was broad. I mean, incredibly broad. We're talking about checks going out to something like 85% of the entire US population. The idea was pretty simple, right? Just get money into as many hands as possible, as fast as possible. But, as this report points out, that kind of blanket approach, it came with a massive kind of hidden cost.
And what was that cost? Well, in a word, inflation. According to this study, printing and just sending out trillions of dollars to almost everyone is a huge reason we saw that crazy inflation and all the supply chain chaos. The report uses a great analogy. It was like flooding an engine. Just too much, too fast, all at once. So if that didn't work perfectly, what's the alternative?
Okay, so to really get what this new proposal is all about, we got to wrap our heads around one core economic idea. And it's actually pretty simple. It's this: not every dollar is spent the same way. The way different people use a new dollar they get, well, that's the whole secret to making a stimulus plan actually work.
All right, so here's the fancy economic term for it: marginal propensity to consume, or MPC for short. Now I know, that sounds super complicated, but I promise it's not. It really just boils down to one simple question. If I handed you an extra dollar right now, what would you do with it? Would you spend it right away on groceries, gas, bills, or would you stick it in your savings account? That one little concept, that's the foundation for this whole new way of thinking about stimulus.
So this study kind of breaks people down into three main groups based on this MPC idea. First up, you've got your high MPC folks. These are generally lower income people who, look, when they get an extra buck, it's got to go right back out the door for necessities. Then you've got the medium MPC group. This is often your middle income crowd. They'll spend some of it, for sure, but they're probably going to save a good chunk of it too. And finally, you have the low MPC group. These are your high income individuals. An extra dollar for them, it's much, much more likely to get saved or invested instead of spent. So you see the pattern, right? The more money you make, the less likely you are to immediately spend the next dollar you get.
And this right here, this is really the heart of the matter. A stimulus check, it isn't supposed to be a gift. The whole point is right there in the name, to stimulate the economy. And for that to happen, what needs to happen? The money has to be spent. It has to move. And as you can see, giving a dollar to someone in that high MPC group, well, you get the most bang for your buck immediately. Over 80 cents of that dollar goes right back into the economy. That effect gets smaller and smaller with the other groups. So the bottom line is pretty clear. If you want maximum stimulus, you got to give the money to the people who are going to spend it.
Okay, so now that we've got this MPC thing down, we can look at the actual plan this report is proposing for the next time the economy takes a nosedive. And it is a radically different approach. It's laser-focused, super efficient, and, they argue, way more powerful. And the big number at the center of this whole thing? $2,000. But get this, it's not a one-time check. The proposal is for $2,000 a month, an ongoing payment designed to create real stability and a continuous flow of spending into the economy.
Now here's the crucial part. This is not for everyone. The plan is super targeted. It's aimed specifically at low-income and fixed-income folks. Think people on Social Security, disability, SSI, and VA benefits. And why them? Well, it's exactly what we just talked about. This is the high MPC group. These are the people who will take that money and, out of necessity, immediately put it back into the economy. And it's not a forever thing either. It's designed as a temporary fix, just for a few months during a really bad recession, to basically jumpstart the economic engine.
So you might be asking, okay, what's the big advantage of this laser-focused approach? Well, it's simple. You get a much bigger bang for your buck, a much bigger economic impact for a surprisingly smaller price tag. It's really about being strategic, you know, instead of just dropping cash from a helicopter and hoping for the best.
Let's just compare these two approaches side by side, because this really puts it all into perspective. The old way, checks to 85% of the country, costing nearly $1 trillion. And the result, the report argues, was a ton of inflation. The new proposal, you target a much smaller group, maybe 50 to 100 million people, the ones who need it the most and will spend it the fastest. The total cost, a few $100 billion. So you get a faster, more direct boost to the economy, you help the people who are most vulnerable, and you do it all for a fraction of the cost and with way, way less risk of causing that crazy inflation.
Okay, now I have to be super clear about this next part. This is really important. As fascinating as this idea is, right now it is just that, an idea, a proposal. This is not a current government policy.
In fact, the report itself says it directly, and I'm quoting here, a $2,000 check has not been approved right now. So I just want to make sure everyone understands, this is a research paper, it's not an active program you can sign up for.
So what's the point of all this then?
Well, the real value here isn't about a check that's coming in the mail tomorrow. The value is that this is a potential blueprint for the future. It's a detailed, data-driven game plan that policymakers can look at the next time we hit a big economic crisis. It's really all about learning from what happened last time so we can have a smarter, better, and less damaging response in the future.
And that really leaves us with one big final question to think about. Instead of these huge, broad, one-size-fits-all solutions, could this be the future? Is this kind of smart, targeted, data-driven support the new way we handle economic recovery? This report, for one, makes a really compelling case that it just might be.
So, you've probably seen the headlines floating around about a $2,200 bonus check from Social Security. And you're likely wondering, is this for real? Am I going to get one? Well, today we're going to cut through all the noise and separate the fact from the fiction. Because believe it or not, behind this one very confusing term is a huge high-stakes debate over the entire future of Social Security.
Okay, so this is the big question, right? It's the one at the heart of all the buzz. So let's just get straight to the answer. And the short answer is no. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but there is no extra payment on its way. The term $2,200 bonus check isn't about getting more money in your pocket tomorrow. Nope, it's actually a catchy and kind of misleading label for a really controversial idea that could completely change Social Security as we know it. To really understand this whole myth, we have to dig into where that $2,200 number even came from. I mean, it wasn't just pulled out of thin air. It actually represents what some researchers are calling a critical line in the sand. Here's the basic idea. The term bonus check is a label that researchers have slapped on Social Security payments that go to higher income folks. The argument is that for these people who often have other sources of income, that monthly check isn't a lifeline they need for rent or food. It acts more like, well, a supplementary bonus. And this is the magic number they came up with, $2,200 a month. What the researchers found was that, for the most part, beneficiaries getting less than this amount rely on it for their basic essentials. But people getting more than this are way more likely to see it as extra, supplemental income. And this one number, this single dividing line, became the turning point for a massive policy debate. So this really creates what you could call a tale of two different benefits. For one group of people, that monthly payment is an absolute lifeline. For another group, it's viewed as something closer to a bonus. Let's really look at what the research says about the difference here. So on one side, you have the lifeline group. Their check covers the absolute basics. We're talking rent, groceries, medical bills. Then, on the other side, you've got the bonus group. These folks often have other financial streams coming in, pensions, 401ks, investments, maybe even a part-time job. For them, the Social Security check is definitely nice to have, but it's not what's keeping the lights on. And this fundamental difference in need is the entire foundation for this whole reform proposal. You see, it really just boils down to perception and necessity. The bigger the benefit check gets, the more it starts to feel like a bonus instead of a monthly stipend you absolutely need to survive. This psychological shift is the key that unlocks the logic behind this entire pretty radical reform idea. Okay, so using this lifeline versus bonus idea, a very specific plan has been floated to basically rebalance the entire system. So let's break down exactly how it would work. The plan really has three main parts. First, you'd gradually reduce the benefits for the top-tier earners. Second, and this is a really big deal, you'd limit or maybe even get rid of their annual cost of living adjustment, what we call the COLA. And finally, you'd take all the money you save from those two changes and you'd redirect it, reallocate it, to boost the benefits for lower-income folks. And that COLA is so important to this whole plan. The cost of living adjustment is that yearly raise that beneficiaries get to make sure their checks can keep up with inflation. If the price of gas and groceries goes up, the COLA is supposed to make sure your benefits buying power doesn't go down. So limiting access to this is a really powerful tool because it means that over time, the real value of those higher-end benefits would actually shrink. So what's the ultimate goal of this whole rebalancing act? What's the end game? Well, we are not talking about a small adjustment here. This is a long-term vision with a very specific and honestly pretty radical final goal. It's a vision that would play out over decades and would have some profound consequences for what Social Security even is. The endgame has a name: equilibrium. So imagine two lines, one high and one low, that are moving further and further apart. The goal of this plan is to reverse that. You'd slowly lower the ceiling for the top earners while at the same time raising the floor for the lowest earners until eventually they meet somewhere in the middle. And look, this wouldn't just happen overnight. The sources that discuss this proposal lay out a timeline of about 20 years. It would start off slow in year 1, just beginning to phase in those limits on the high-end benefits and their COLAs. By about year 5, enough money would have been saved to start boosting the lowest monthly payments. A decade in, you'd start to see a real, measurable shift in how the benefits are distributed. And the ultimate goal is to hit that equilibrium point around the 20-year mark. But a plan this transformative was bound to get some major criticism. And the main critique isn't really about the math or the numbers. It's about philosophy. Critics argue this plan doesn't just tweak Social Security, it fundamentally rewrites its entire purpose. This gets to what you could call the program's identity crisis. Historically, Social Security has always been seen as an earned benefit. It's kind of like an insurance program where the payout you get is tied to what you paid in over your working life. This new proposal, it shifts the focus away from earnings and puts it on to need. And in doing that, it transforms the program into something that looks a whole lot more like a guaranteed basic income, where the goal is just to give a standard amount to everybody. So the crucial point is that this whole debate over bonus checks and equilibrium, it really forces us to face a core question about the program's identity. This isn't just a technical argument about policy. It's a deep philosophical one about what we believe Social Security should be in the 21st century. And this quote just crystallizes the fundamental conflict here. Critics say this isn't a small tweak. It's a total change of focus. It would turn a program that was designed to reflect a person's career into a poverty prevention tool. In other words, a guaranteed basic income, which is just flat out not how Social Security was ever designed to work in the first place. And that leaves us all with a really essential question: what should the soul of Social Security be? Is it a reward for a lifetime of work and contributions, or is it a universal safety net designed to prevent poverty for everyone? There is no easy answer here, but that is the real complicated debate hiding behind the simple myth of the $2,200 bonus check.
There's all this talk about monthly raises and new checks, so we're going to break down what's really being discussed. You've probably seen these two big numbers floating around everywhere. But honestly, there is a lot of confusion. Are they real? Are they connected? Is it one or the other? Let's clear the air and figure out exactly what these are and, more importantly, where they actually stand. Okay, so our goal here is to cut through the noise and separate what's just speculation from the actual reality. We're going to look at each of these ideas one by one, where it came from, what its purpose is, and of course, what's its current status.
First up, let's talk about that proposal for a permanent monthly increase to Social Security benefits. And I want to stress that this isn't a one-time payment, but a recurring every single month addition to your check. The magic number being tossed around here is $200. The idea is for this to be an ongoing adjustment to help folks deal with rising costs, and it would be totally separate from the usual cost of living adjustments, or COLAs, that we already have.
Now, this isn't just some idea pulled out of thin air. It's actually a key part of a real piece of legislation that has been introduced in Congress. It's called the Social Security Expansion Act.
But, and this is a really big but, here's the reality check. While the bill is out there, it has not been passed by Congress. It hasn't been signed into law. It is still very, very much just a proposal with a long road ahead before it could ever become a reality.
So why hasn't it passed? Well, it seems there's a pretty big hurdle holding this whole thing back. Even though the idea of more money sounds great to a lot of people, the way the proposal is structured right now is creating a bit of a political challenge. Let's take a look at what that is.
And here's the crux of the problem: targeting. See, the bill as it's written now gives this raise to pretty much everybody. And the critics are saying, hang on, do higher income recipients really need this extra cash? The suggestion floating around is to refine it, to focus that raise specifically on lower income beneficiaries, to make it a tool to lift people above the federal poverty line. That, they argue, would be a much more compelling pitch, and maybe an easier sell to lawmakers.
All right, let's shift gears and talk about the other big number you've probably heard about. And it's important to know this is a totally different beast. We are not talking about a permanent benefit increase here. This is an economic intervention.
Yep. This one is all about a one-time payment of $2,000. So think of it less like a raise and more like a single shot of cash, a one-and-done deal.
And that is a really key distinction to make. See, a stimulus check has basically nothing to do with the Social Security system itself. It's a broad economic tool the government pulls out of its toolbox when the whole economy is in trouble, think recession or high unemployment, to try and get people to start spending again.
So just like that $200 raise, let's be super clear on this one too. No new stimulus check has been approved. Right now, it is completely hypothetical. It's an idea that would only even get on the table if the economy really started to take a significant downturn.
So let's just imagine for a second that a stimulus check did get approved. Who would get it? Well, we can look at past stimulus rounds for some pretty good clues. The biggest hurdle, as always, would likely be income. Your income would need to be below a certain threshold to qualify, on top of other requirements like having a Social Security number and not being claimed as a dependent on someone else's taxes.
Okay, this next part is where things seem to get really confusing for a lot of people. It's the big question. Are we talking about one or the other? If, by some wild turn of events, both of these things were to pass, would you have to choose between them? Let's clear this up right now.
In other words, are these two ideas mutually exclusive? Let's say the stars align, the Social Security Expansion Act passes, and the economy gets bad enough for a stimulus. Could a person theoretically get both the permanent raise and the one-time check? Let's break down just how different they really are.
I mean, just look at this breakdown. They are fundamentally different concepts. The raise is a permanent change to your Social Security benefits. The trigger for it is a new law passing. The stimulus check, that's a one-time payment to jolt the economy. And the trigger for that is bad economic data. And look at where the money comes from. One is from the Social Security program, the other from general treasury funds. Two totally separate buckets of money.
So the simple answer is yes. You could, in theory, receive both. They're totally separate proposals that don't conflict with each other at all. They have different goals, different triggers, and they come from different pots of money. Getting one wouldn't automatically disqualify you from the other as long as you met the specific eligibility rules for each one.
Okay, so we've broken down both of these big ideas that are getting so much attention. So what's the bottom line? What's the reality on the ground as of today?
And folks, if you take away only one single thing from this entire explainer, please let it be this. As of right now, neither the $200 raise nor a new stimulus check has been approved. Despite all the headlines, all the videos, all the discussion, both of these ideas are still just that. Ideas and proposals. They are not a reality. So if you want to keep an eye on these things yourself, here's what to watch for. For that $200 raise, you need to track the progress of the Social Security Expansion Act in Congress. Is it moving through committees? Is it being debated? For a potential stimulus check, you'll need to watch the major economic reports, things like inflation, unemployment, and GDP. That's the kind of data that would even start that conversation in the first place.
And you know, all of this leaves us with one final, maybe bigger thought to chew on. The fact that we're even having these conversations so often, the fact that these ideas get so much attention online, what does that tell us? It suggests there's a real deep-seated issue with financial security and the struggle that so many people face with rising costs. And that's a conversation worth paying attention to, regardless of what happens with these specific proposals.
You know, we're going to tackle a huge question that I know is on a lot of people's minds. Is a fourth stimulus check coming in 2025? We're going to cut right through all the noise and really explain what's myth, what's reality, and what economic triggers would actually have to be pulled for another payment to even be a possibility.
Okay, let's just get right to it. The big one, that $2,000 fourth stimulus check. This question comes up all the time, and it's not just from folks on fixed incomes like Social Security or VA benefits. The financial squeeze is being felt everywhere. I mean, we're seeing data that shows even people earning six figures are struggling like never before. It really has everyone asking the exact same thing. Could this be the year?
So what really makes these payments happen? You know, there's this common idea that it's all about public pressure, that if enough of us call or email or sign petitions, lawmakers will act. But the reality? Well, the reality is that how often we ask has almost nothing to do with the decision. Yeah, the decision isn't based on requests or petitions at all. It is 100% an economic one. Think of a stimulus check as a very specific tool in a toolbox, and it only gets used in one situation, a really severe economic crisis.
In fact, the official name kind of gives the whole game away. It's not really a stimulus check, it's an economic impact payment, or EIP. The name tells you its true purpose. The goal isn't just to help people out, it's to have people immediately spend that money to jolt the economy. Seriously, saving it or paying off debt actually works against what they're trying to do. The government needs to see this massive, immediate surge in spending to pull the whole economy out of a nosedive.
And the condition that triggers this kind of action is a major economic contraction, which we all know as a recession. Now, that word sounds terrifying, and honestly for good reason. But here's another way to look at it. A recession is like hitting an economic reset button. Kind of like when you're playing a video game and you just start over. A recession, as painful as it is, can be the very thing that forces those inflated prices and super high interest rates to finally come back down to earth. A short, sharp recession could be the nasty medicine the economy needs to get better.
Okay, so that's the theory. But let's talk about the real world. Where is our economy right now? To figure out if a stimulus payment is on the horizon, we have to know if the stage is even being set for that kind of big downturn.
Officially, you're always going to hear the same message. The economy is strong, keep spending, everything's fine. And there's a good reason for this. Imagine if they came out and said, yeah, we're worried. What would happen? We'd all stop spending immediately. And that would cause the very crash they're trying to avoid. So they have to maintain this illusion of strength just to keep the whole machine running.
But if you look behind that public-facing story, the actual economic data has been telling a very, very different tale for a while now. A lot of the key indicators have been flashing warning signs. You can think of them as red lights on your car's dashboard or alarm bells going off in the engine room. These signals are suggesting the economy is nowhere near as solid as the official story would have us believe.
So to understand what could happen next, a lot of investors use this really simple analogy. They say the economy takes the stairs up. Growth is a slow, grinding, step-by-step process. It takes a really, really long time to climb all the way to the top.
But here's the thing. It can't climb forever. Once it finally reaches its peak, it just kind of bounces around up there, unable to go any higher. And at that point, well, there's only one direction left to go, and that's down.
And when the economy falls, it does not take the stairs, it takes the elevator straight down. It happens fast, it's sudden, and it comes with incredible force. I mean, just think back to early 2020. In January, life was pretty normal. By February, things started to feel a little weird. And by March, the entire world had shut down. That's the elevator down.
This is exactly where many analysts believe we are right now. We're perched at the very top after that long, slow climb, just teetering on the edge of the cliff. Any little unexpected nudge could be the thing that triggers that elevator ride all the way to the bottom.
So if you're waiting for news on a stimulus check, don't watch for a press conference. You gotta watch for the real triggers. Look for consistently bad economic reports, one after another. Watch for the Federal Reserve to do something sudden, like an emergency interest rate cut. Pay attention to how people around you are spending their money. And always, always be on the lookout for a catalyst, some unexpected event, or for lawmakers to start getting serious about massive federal spending cuts. Those are the real signs.
So, you see, asking for a simple yes or no on another stimulus check is kind of asking the wrong question. The real question is about the health of the economy. It's not a matter of if lawmakers want to send out money, it's a matter of when the economy gets so bad that it forces their hand. A stimulus only happens when they have literally no other choice but to hit that big red EIP button to stop a total collapse. And now you know exactly what to look for. And that really leaves us with this one final thought. If the economy is really teetering on that cliff edge right now, are we all just waiting for one final unforeseen nudge to send the whole thing over? We aren't just waiting on politicians to make up their minds. We might be waiting for the economy itself to take that final decisive step off the edge. And that's the real story to watch. Okay, let's talk about a pretty wild idea. What if every single person on Social Security got the exact same check every month? I mean, not based on how much you earned during your career, but just one flat amount for everyone. It's a really radical proposal, and it's starting to get some serious attention because it would completely transform one of the country's most important programs. So let's dive in and really unpack what this is all about.
You know, right now, the system is the complete opposite of flat. It's all over the place. You've got some folks on one end getting as little as, say, $50 or $60 a month, and then on the other extreme, the maximum possible benefit is over $5,000. That is a gigantic gap, and it's really the core issue that's fueling this whole conversation.
So, before we can really get the logic behind this flat benefit idea, we've got to first understand this huge divide in the current system. It's kind of like a tale of two different programs.
And look, this isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. This disparity has very real, very human consequences. Right now, there are about 11 million seniors in the U.S. living below the federal poverty line, and a lot of them depend on Social Security. That one number alone just shows you how high the stakes are here.
Yeah, that maximum benefit, the one around $5,000, it gets a lot of attention. But the reality for most people, it's nowhere close to that. The average retirement benefit is actually just under $2,000. And if you're on disability, SSDI, the average is even lower, just a bit under $1,600. So this chart really shows you the vast majority of people are a long, long way from that top payment.
This quote from one of the sources we looked at just hits the nail on the head. It talks about this massive bifurcation. And that's exactly what it is, a system split in two, where some people are getting just a few dollars, while others are getting thousands. This is the problem the flat benefit idea is trying to solve.
So what's the big idea to fix this divide? Well, it's to completely flatten the whole system, to create one single universal benefit amount that every single qualified person would get every single month.
And the number that's being talked about is around $2,200 a month. Now that number wasn't just picked out of a hat. It's what they've calculated as the equilibrium point, the spot where the high-end and low-end benefits would eventually meet in the middle.
So how would we even get there? I mean, you can't just flip a switch overnight. The whole idea is that it would be a gradual process. You'd be systematically raising the payments for people at the bottom, while at the same time, you're slowly lowering the payments for people at the very top until everybody eventually lands on that same flat number.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. That sounds like a massive, complicated undertaking. So how would a change this huge actually work in practice? Let's get into the mechanics.
It really breaks down into about 4 main steps. First, you start to phase down those high-end benefits over several years. A really key part of this is step 2. You'd stop giving the annual cost of living adjustments, the COLAs, to the highest earners. Step 3, all the money you save from that gets rerouted. And finally, step 4, you use those funds to boost up all the low-end benefits until they hit that target equilibrium point.
Now, a really big piece of this whole debate is the timeline. How long would this take? Is it a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, maybe even 15 years or more? The source material shows there are different schools of thought on this. And it matters, because the longer the timeline, the higher that final flat benefit is likely to be, just because of inflation and economic growth over time.
And there are a couple of different ways to actually bring those high-end benefits down. One idea is a simple annual deduction. You just trim their benefit by, say, 5% each year. The other, maybe a slightly gentler way to do it, is to just freeze their benefits by taking away their yearly COLA. That means their payment just wouldn't keep up with inflation anymore, and its real value would slowly decrease.
If a plan like this actually happened, it would be so much more than just a tweak to payment amounts. It would fundamentally change the entire purpose and identity of Social Security as we know it.
What this would do is basically turn Social Security into something that looks a lot like a guaranteed basic income, or GBI. And the idea behind a GBI is pretty simple. Everyone who qualifies gets the same recurring payment. It creates a true financial floor that no one can fall beneath.
And this really gets to the philosophical heart of the whole thing. It would shift Social Security from being an earned benefit, where what you get out is tied to what you put in, to a system of universal support, where you get the benefits simply because you're a qualified citizen or resident. It's a huge change in thinking.
The potential results here are pretty massive. I mean, on the one hand, a move like this could lift millions of seniors and people with disabilities out of poverty. It would give them a stable, predictable income. It would also make the super complex Social Security formulas way, way simpler. But maybe most importantly, it forces us all to have a conversation about what we want Social Security to be in the 21st century.
Let's just boil it all down and put these two systems side by side. Right now, your benefit is based on your earnings history. In the new proposal, it's based on just being a citizen or resident. The benefit amount goes from totally variable to completely flat, and the main goal of the program itself actually shifts from replacing your income to preventing poverty, period.
So when you get right down to it, this whole debate makes us ask a really fundamental question about one of our most important institutions. Should Social Security be an earned benefit that you're entitled to based on your work, or should it be a guaranteed safety net for absolutely everyone? How we answer that question will really define its future.
So are we getting another stimulus check? Come on, it's the question that's on everybody's mind, right? Especially if you're on a fixed income. But what if I told you the answer isn't buried in politics? It's actually hidden in plain sight, in the economic data. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and find the one key trigger that actually makes these checks a reality.
This is the big one. It's the question we're all asking. After everything we've been through, it just feels like everyone is wondering when, or even if, more help is ever going to be on the way. Well, instead of just guessing, we're going to look at the exact same signals the people in charge are watching. It's time to see what might really be coming over the horizon.
Okay, so before we can look ahead, we have to get one really important thing straight. And, it might not be what you want to hear,
But believe me, understanding this is the absolute most critical piece of the entire puzzle. And here it is. The bottom line is, it doesn't matter how many petitions get signed or how loudly people demand more help, none of that directly triggers a stimulus check. The one thing, the only thing that acts as the catalyst is the health of the U.S. economy. Period.
Now look, I know that might sound a little discouraging at first, but it's actually the complete opposite. It's empowering. It means we can stop getting caught up in all the political noise and start looking at the real data, the same stuff the policymakers are looking at. It changes everything from just, hoping for help to actually understanding the conditions that make that help necessary.
So, if it's all about the economy, what are those conditions? What should we be looking for? Well, this brings us right to the heart of what we're talking about today, the economic trigger. Let's break down exactly how this thing works. The key idea here is something called an inverse correlation. Now, don't let the fancy term fool you. It's actually super simple. Just think of a seesaw, right? When one side goes up, the other side has to go down. It's the same here. When the health of the economy goes down, the chances of the government sending out stimulus checks goes up. They move in opposite directions. Simple as that. Think about it. When the economy is just humming along, jobs are everywhere, businesses are growing, there's basically zero chance of stimulus. And why would there be? You don't need to stimulate an economy that's already running hot. But when things start to slow down, when the economy looks like it's heading for a recession, that's when the whole conversation in Washington completely changes.
So what exactly should you be watching for? Well, here are the big 4 signals. First, rising unemployment claims. That's a big one. When more people are losing their jobs, it's a clear sign of trouble. Then you've got slowing growth and contracting business activity, which just means companies are making less and selling less. But honestly, the real flashing red light to watch for is the Federal Reserve. When they start cutting interest rates, you need to pay attention. They only do that when they see big trouble on the horizon and want to make it cheaper to borrow money to get things going again. These are the headlines that truly matter.
And look, this isn't just some theory somebody came up with. The data shows a crystal clear, repeating pattern throughout recent American history. It's kind of undeniable once you see it.
Let that sink in for a second. Every single major recession in the modern era has led to stimulus checks. That tells us that these payments aren't random acts of kindness. They're a standard, almost predictable response to a specific crisis, a major economic downturn. The playbook is there, and they've used it again and again.
Let's just walk through it. Back in 2001, the dot-com bubble burst, and we had a recession. The response? $300 checks. Okay. 7 years later, 2008, the housing market completely collapses, triggering a massive global crisis. The response? $600 checks. Then, of course, 2020, the pandemic shuts down the entire world. The response? $1,200 checks. Are you seeing the pattern here? A major recession hits, and boom, payments go out. It has happened every single time.
But hold on, because if we look just a little bit closer at those numbers, something even more interesting and kind of wild starts to pop out. It's not just that they sent checks, it's the amount of money that tells a whole other story.
Okay, so the first time, in 2001, the baseline was set, $300. Then in 2008, when the next big crisis hit, what happened? The amount exactly doubled to $600.
And in 2020, you already know where this is going. It doubled again to $1,200. I mean, come on, that's not a coincidence. That is a clear mathematical pattern playing out over 2 decades. Each payment was literally double the one that came before it.
All right, so now we're armed with the 2 biggest clues. We know about the economic trigger, and we've seen this incredible historical pattern. So what can we reasonably guess about what might be coming next?
This is the million-dollar question, isn't it? If we were to face another major recession in the near future, would the people in charge stick to this exact same doubling pattern that's held true for more than 20 years?
Well, if you just follow the math to its next logical step, you double $1,200 and you get $2,400. Now, let's be crystal clear about this. This is not a prediction. It's just pointing out a very curious historical trend. But it is a fascinating pattern to think about, isn't it?
All of this really leads to one powerful, simple takeaway. If you want to have a real idea of what's coming, you can pretty much ignore the political shouting matches. The real answers are in the jobs reports, the GDP numbers, and what the Federal Reserve is doing. You now know exactly what to look for. The real signs that history shows us come right before these payments.
And here's one final crucial warning. When these things happen, they happen fast. I mean, think back to early 2020. In February, everything seemed pretty normal. By March, the entire world had changed. And by April, checks were already on their way.
The shift from a stable economy to a crisis can happen in just a few weeks. When the dominoes start to fall, they fall quickly. So, when you put it all together, history seems to show us that a major stimulus payment isn't really a question of if, but a question of when a recession forces the government's hand. The focus shifts away from waiting for politicians to make an announcement and toward watching the economy itself. So the real question I have for you is, now that you know what to look for, what economic signs will you be watching?
So, have you heard the talk about a possible $1,400 check? And not just for anyone. This one would be aimed specifically at Social Security beneficiaries. Well, this isn't just some rumor floating around. It's actually a formal proposal that's starting to get some real attention. We're going to break down exactly what it is, who's behind it, and what it could all mean.
Right, so what's the big idea here? It's pretty straightforward, but also pretty powerful. A one-time payment sent directly to people on Social Security. This is not like those broad stimulus checks that went out to almost everybody. No, this is a very targeted measure, and it's being pushed by a major advocacy group to solve a very specific problem that millions of Americans on fixed incomes are dealing with right now. Let's really dig into the details.
Okay, at its core, this whole thing is a call for what they're calling a $1,400 catch-up payment. So, who came up with this, and what exactly does catch-up even mean in this context?
Well, the group that's really championing this is the Senior Citizens League, and they're a pretty big deal, a major advocacy group that represents older Americans. Now, that's important because it tells you this isn't just a random idea. It's part of a serious, formal push to get the attention of lawmakers. They're basically arguing that something has to be done to help beneficiaries who they say have fallen way behind financially.
And the number they've landed on is very specific. A single, one-time payment of $1,400. This isn't some tiny tweak to your monthly benefit. It's designed to be a pretty substantial chunk of cash, totally separate from the regular monthly payments or any of those annual cost of living increases.
So why are they calling it a catch-up payment? Well, it's because the whole idea is retroactive. See, it's not about stimulating the economy going forward. It's about looking back and trying to compensate people for the buying power they've already lost over the last couple of years. It's a period where advocates argue that the annual benefit increases just did not in any way match the real-world explosion in prices for everything.
But to really get why they're asking for this, you have to understand the problem they're trying to fix. And the whole argument really comes down to something we can call the COLA gap. Okay, so the central point here is that there's a huge disconnect. The official cost of living adjustment, the COLA, that's the whole system that's supposed to make sure benefits keep up with inflation. But the source material we're looking at claims these adjustments have been, frankly, lackluster and even pathetic, totally failing to show how much more expensive life has actually gotten for folks on a fixed income.
And you can really see what they're talking about right here. That bar on the left, that's the official COLA increases. But then you look at the bar on the right, which shows how much the actual cost of living has reportedly jumped. That massive difference between the two, well, that's the gap. That represents a real, tangible loss of spending power for beneficiaries, month in and month out.
And just when you think it can't get more complicated, there's another layer to this that makes that gap even wider. See, any COLA increase that beneficiaries get, that's not what they actually get to keep. A big slice of it is often immediately eaten up by rising Medicare Part B premiums, which, as you know, get deducted right from their checks. The source points out that just back in 2022, those premiums shot up by 14.5%. That just wipes out a huge chunk of any raise before it even has a chance to hit a bank account.
This quote from the source material, man, it just says it all, doesn't it? It really captures that feeling of frustration and pressure behind this whole proposal. It's a blunt, honest take on the financial squeeze so many beneficiaries feel. The feeling is that they're stuck between COLAs that don't keep up and mandatory costs that keep going up, and it leaves them feeling like they're just constantly losing ground.
So you might be wondering, has anything like this ever been done before? Is there any history of the government sending out a special payment just to Social Security recipients? Well, as it turns out, the source material points to a pretty clear example that suggests this idea isn't coming completely out of left field.
Yeah, you just have to go back to 2009. Right in the aftermath of a major recession, the government did exactly that. They send out a one-time $250 payment directly and only to Social Security beneficiaries as a form of economic help. And so the people pushing for this $1,400 proposal today see that as a clear precedent. It proves that the system is in place to deliver targeted financial support to this specific group, completely outside of the normal COLA process.
Okay, so even if lawmakers were to agree that, yes, this payment is a good idea, one absolutely massive question hangs over this whole thing. Where would the money come from? And this isn't just a minor detail, it's probably the biggest hurdle this proposal faces.
It really comes down to two potential paths, and they could not have more different outcomes. The first path, which the Senior Citizens League's proposal seems to suggest, would be to just take the money from the Social Security Trust Fund itself. The source material raises a huge red flag on this, arguing it would just drain the fund and make it run out of money even faster. The second path, and the one the source much prefers, is to fund it from the Treasury's general fund, the same pot of money they used for the stimulus checks.
Yeah, by treating this payment like economic relief from the Treasury, the money would have, and I'm quoting here, no impact on Social Security whatsoever. None. Nada. Zero. This approach would treat it as general government spending, and that would protect the long-term financial health of the Social Security program, which, let's be honest, is already facing its own serious financial challenges down the road.
All right, that was a lot to take in. We've gone through the proposal itself, the problem it's trying to solve, the history behind this kind of thing, and that really critical debate over the funding. So let's kind of bring it all together and sum up what you should really take away from all this. First, and this is super important, remember this is a proposal from an advocacy group. It is not a bill that's about to become law tomorrow. Second, it's a direct answer to the very real problem of inflation just eating away at fixed incomes. Third, the biggest sticking point, the biggest debate, is how to pay for it without hurting the Social Security program. And finally, this whole thing really shines a bright light on a much bigger, ongoing conversation about how we, as a country, can best support our seniors and people with disabilities, especially when times get tough economically.
And that really leaves us with one last thing to think about. Looking beyond this specific $1,400 proposal, are we maybe seeing the start of a new kind of policy tool? Instead of these huge, broad stimulus payments for everybody, could these kinds of targeted, one-time payments to specific vulnerable groups become a more common way to provide economic relief in the future? It's definitely a question worth thinking about.
So are we getting another stimulus check? Come on, it's the question that's on everybody's mind, right? Especially if you're on a fixed income. But what if I told you the answer isn't buried in politics? It's actually hidden in plain sight, in the economic data. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and find the one key trigger that actually makes these checks a reality.
This is the big one. It's the question we're all asking. After everything we've been through, it just feels like everyone is wondering when, or even if, more help is ever going to be on the way. Well, instead of just guessing, we're going to look at the exact same signals the people in charge are watching. It's time to see what might really be coming over the horizon.
Okay, so before we can look ahead, we have to get one really important thing straight. And, it might not be what you want to hear, but believe me, understanding this is the absolute most critical piece of the entire puzzle. And here it is. The bottom line is, it doesn't matter how many petitions get signed or how loudly people demand more help, none of that directly triggers a stimulus check. The one thing, the only thing that acts as the catalyst is the health of the U.S. economy. Period.
Now look, I know that might sound a little discouraging at first, but it's actually the complete opposite. It's empowering. It means we can stop getting caught up in all the political noise and start looking at the real data, the same stuff the policymakers are looking at. It changes everything from just, hoping for help to actually understanding the conditions that make that help necessary.
So, if it's all about the economy, what are those conditions? What should we be looking for? Well, this brings us right to the heart of what we're talking about today. The economic trigger. Let's break down exactly how this thing works.
The key idea here is something called an inverse correlation. Now, don't let the fancy term fool you. It's actually super simple. Just think of a seesaw, right? When one side goes up, the other side has to go down. It's the same here. When the health of the economy goes down, the chances of the government sending out stimulus checks goes up. They move in opposite directions. Simple as that.
Think about it. When the economy is just humming along, jobs are everywhere, businesses are growing, there's basically zero chance of stimulus. And why would there be? You don't need to stimulate an economy that's already running hot. But when things start to slow down, when the economy looks like it's heading for a recession, that's when the whole conversation in Washington completely changes.
So what exactly should you be watching for? Well, here are the big 4 signals. First, rising unemployment claims. That's a big one. When more people are losing their jobs, it's a clear sign of trouble. Then you've got slowing growth and contracting business activity, which just means companies are making less and selling less. But honestly, the real flashing red light to watch for is the Federal Reserve. When they start cutting interest rates, you need to pay attention. They only do that when they see big trouble on the horizon and want to make it cheaper to borrow money to get things going again. These are the headlines that truly matter.
And look, this isn't just some theory somebody came up with. The data shows a crystal clear, repeating pattern throughout recent American history. It's kind of undeniable once you see it.
Let that sink in for a second. Every single major recession in the modern era has led to stimulus checks. That tells us that these payments aren't random acts of kindness. They're a standard, almost predictable response to a specific crisis, a major economic downturn. The playbook is there, and they've used it again and again.
Let's just walk through it. Back in 2001, the dot-com bubble burst, and we had a recession. The response? $300 checks. Okay. 7 years later, 2008, the housing market completely collapses, triggering a massive global crisis. The response? $600 checks. Then, of course, 2020, the pandemic shuts down the entire world. The response? $1,200 checks. Are you seeing the pattern here? A major recession hits, and boom, payments go out. It has happened every single time.
But hold on, because if we look just a little bit closer at those numbers, something even more interesting and kind of wild starts to pop out. It's not just that they sent checks, it's the amount of money that tells a whole other story.
Okay, so the first time, in 2001, the baseline was set, $300. Then in 2008, when the next big crisis hit, what happened? The amount exactly doubled to $600.
And in 2020, you already know where this is going. It doubled again to $1,200. I mean, come on, that's not a coincidence. That is a clear mathematical pattern playing out over 2 decades. Each payment was literally double the one that came before it.
All right, so now we're armed with the 2 biggest clues. We know about the economic trigger, and we've seen this incredible historical pattern. So what can we reasonably guess about what might be coming next?
This is the million-dollar question, isn't it? If we were to face another major recession in the near future, would the people in charge stick to this exact same doubling pattern that's held true for more than 20 years?
Well, if you just follow the math to its next logical step, you double $1,200 and you get $2,400. Now, let's be crystal clear about this. This is not a prediction. It's just pointing out a very curious historical trend. But it is a fascinating pattern to think about, isn't it?
All of this really leads to one powerful, simple takeaway. If you want to have a real idea of what's coming, you can pretty much ignore the political shouting matches. The real answers are in the jobs reports, the GDP numbers, and what the Federal Reserve is doing. You now know exactly what to look for. The real signs that history shows us come right before these payments.
And here's one final crucial warning. When these things happen, they happen fast. I mean, think back to early 2020. In February, everything seemed pretty normal. By March, the entire world had changed. And by April, checks were already on their way. The shift from a stable economy to a crisis can happen in just a few weeks. When the dominoes start to fall, they fall quickly.
So, when you put it all together, history seems to show us that a major stimulus payment isn't really a question of if, but a question of when a recession forces the government's hand. The focus shifts away from waiting for politicians to make an announcement and toward watching the economy itself. So the real question I have for you is, now that you know what to look for, what economic signs will you be watching?
You know, there's a question that just keeps popping up, and I see it everywhere. Are we going to get a 4th stimulus check? It's a huge topic online, and honestly, for very good reason. So today, we're going to cut through all that noise and really look at what the economy itself is telling us. So let's just get right to it. This is the question on everybody's mind. And listen, while there's tons of speculation out there, the real answer isn't buried in some political headline. Nope. It's found in the economic data. And that's not an exaggeration. We're talking about this today because for millions of people who are really feeling the financial squeeze, this isn't just some abstract idea. It's a very real daily concern. So let's try to get some real clarity. All right, here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with what actually triggers these payments. Then we'll look at a pretty surprising pattern from the past. After that, we'll zero in on the one economic number you need to keep an eye on. And finally, we'll talk about why the next stimulus might look totally different from the last one. Okay, first things first. What actually causes a stimulus check to happen in the first place? It's not random, and it's not just politics. It is a direct, calculated response to one specific event, an economy that's gotten sick. And when we say the economy is sick, we're really talking about a recession. That's the official word for it, right? A major, widespread, and kind of prolonged downturn that hits everything and everyone, from big corporations to your local coffee shop. And this right here is the core idea we need to understand.
If you just look back at the last couple of decades, the pattern is crystal clear. Every single major recession has been followed by stimulus checks. Every single time. It's basically become a standard move in the modern economic playbook.
Here's a great way to think about it. Imagine the economy is a patient. A recession? That's when the patient gets seriously ill. The lawmakers are the doctors, and their go-to prescription is a big old injection of cash. That's the stimulus, to try and get the patient back up and running. And it makes sense, right? The sicker the patient, the bigger the dose of medicine they're going to need.
So let's dig into that history a little bit, because when you actually examine the numbers from past recessions, well, a really fascinating and maybe even predictive pattern starts to show up. Okay, check this out. Back in 2001, after the dot-com bubble burst, the check was for $300. Then in 2008, during that massive financial crisis, it doubled to $600. And then in 2020, with the pandemic, it doubled again to $1,200. Are you seeing the pattern here? Now, if you just follow that doubling logic, the next number in that sequence would be around $2,400. But, and I have to be super clear about this is just an observation of a historical trend. It is absolutely not a guarantee. The actual amount of any future check would depend completely on how severe the economic downturn is at the time. So if a sick economy is the trigger, how do we know when it's sick enough for the doctors to step in? Well, there's one key health report that we can all look at. It comes out on the first Friday of every single month, and it's simply called the Jobs Report. And inside this report, there are a few vital signs. You've got the headline number, the unemployment rate. But just as important is jobs created or lost. Are companies hiring, or are they laying people off? The labor participation rate tells us how many people are even trying to find a job. And average hourly earnings shows if our paychecks are keeping pace with inflation. Altogether, they paint a pretty clear picture of our economic health.
So when you start to see that businesses, from the giant corporations all the way down to your local pizzeria, are slowing down their hiring, or worse, starting to let people go, that is a massive warning flare for the whole economy. It means people aren't spending as much, companies are getting nervous, and the whole economic engine is starting to sputter. That is the signal that gets lawmakers to scramble and start seriously talking about what they need to do. But, and this is really important, if they do act again, there's a good chance it won't be a carbon copy of last time. The whole strategy could shift to something much more targeted.
See, the last few checks were broad. They went out to a massive chunk of the population. A targeted strategy is different. It would focus laser-like on low-income and fixed-income households. Why? Because those are the folks most likely to spend the money immediately and pump it right back into the economy. This gives you way more bang for your buck, and it does it with less risk of driving up inflation for everybody else.
So the big takeaway here is this. We might need to adjust our expectations. If and when another stimulus package comes along, it could be designed very, very differently. Maybe aimed at a smaller group of people to get the maximum economic impact with the fewest negative side effects.
Okay, so let's just trace that path one more time. It starts with an economic contraction. We see it in those bad jobs reports. That triggers the lawmakers' scramble, where they have to respond. Then a stimulus package is passed, and finally, the payments are distributed with one single goal: to get spent right away and kickstart the economy. So that brings us to the final thought. Based on modern history, it really doesn't seem to be a matter of if the government will intervene in the next major recession. The real question is, how sick does the economy have to get before they open up that playbook once again? That's what we'll all be watching.
You know, remember those stimulus checks we all got a few years back? For some people, they were an absolute lifeline. For others, well, they were a nice little bonus. A really fascinating new study is asking a powerful question. What if we could have gotten a much, much bigger economic boost, but for a fraction of the cost? The answer, it turns out, lies in getting the money to the right people and doing it in a totally different way. So let's break down this idea for what might just be a smarter stimulus.
Okay, so let's get right to the heart of it. The proposal this study makes is for a recurring $2,000 monthly check. But wait, this isn't some money for everyone idea. Not at all. The entire strategy really hinges on who gets this check, and the data suggests that being super precise is the key to making it all work.
So to really get to the bottom of this, we're going to walk through 4 key parts. First, we'll look back at the stimulus dilemma from 2020 and 2021. Then, we'll uncover a key economic clue that is absolutely central to this new idea. After that, we'll compare the economic impact of spenders versus savers. And finally, we'll explore all the details of this proposal for a smarter stimulus.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the stimulus dilemma. To figure out where we might be going, we first have to really understand where we've been. So let's take a look back at the lessons we learned from that last big round of stimulus payments.
So between 2020 and 2021, the government pushed out 3 big waves of stimulus checks, and the total price tag? A pretty staggering $850 billion. That's more than the entire economy of some countries. The whole goal was to jumpstart our economy, but a price tag that big raises a really important question. Did that money actually get spent in the right places, or did we kind of miss the mark?
Well, here were the core problems with that old approach. The checks went out to about 85% of the population. That means a huge chunk of that money went to people who, frankly, didn't really need it for their immediate expenses. Economists have a name for this. They call it the helicopter approach, just kind of dumping money across the landscape and hoping for the best. And the result? Well, not only was it super inefficient, but some studies suggest it added about 3 percentage points to the inflation that came later. There just had to be a better way.
And that leads us right into our second section, a key economic clue. See, researchers who are analyzing all this data found a secret to making stimulus way more effective. And it all comes down to understanding one simple but really powerful economic principle.
That principle is called the marginal propensity to consume, or MPC. Now, don't let the name fool you. It sounds really academic, but it's an incredibly simple idea. It just measures one thing. When you get an extra dollar, how much of it do you actually spend and how much do you save? That's the whole concept right there.
Let's just boil it all the way down. Forget the jargon for a second. NPC is really just asking this one simple question. How likely are you to spend the next dollar you get? That's it. And this simple question, it turns out, is the key to unlocking a much more effective stimulus strategy.
So this concept basically creates 2 very distinct groups of people. You've got folks with a high MPC. They're typically on lower incomes, so an extra dollar is very likely to be spent immediately on necessities. Then you have people with a low MPC. They're usually on higher incomes, so that extra dollar is way more likely to be saved or invested. Simply put, the less of a financial cushion you have, the more likely you are to spend new money right away. And that distinction, well, it changes everything.
Okay, so let's move on to section 3 and see how this all connects. Spenders versus savers. Now that we understand what MPC is, let's actually apply it. Let's follow the money and see what happens when we give the same amount of cash to people on opposite ends of that spectrum.
Let's use that core member from the study, $2,000. Now, imagine 2 of these checks are sent out. One goes to a spender, someone with a high MPC. The other one goes to a saver, someone with a low MPC. The amount of money is exactly the same, but where it goes next tells 2 completely different stories about the economy.
The data for the person with the high MPC is pretty striking. When this person gets that $2,000, the vast majority of it, about $1,600, is spent within just 10 days. The rest of it, gone within a month. This means the entire amount gets injected directly back into the economy, buying groceries, paying rent, supporting local businesses. This is stimulus in its absolute purest form.
And this is the perfect time for a little reality check. The whole purpose of a stimulus check is right there in the name, to stimulate. It's not designed to be a savings plan or a debt reduction tool. Its only job is to get money moving through the economy to keep everything going. Spending isn't a side effect of the program, it's the entire point.
So what happens when that same $2,000 check goes to a person with a low MPC, the saver? Well, the study found that they generally don't spend much of it at all. That money gets saved, or invested, or used to pay down a mortgage. From an economic stimulus perspective, that money is effectively taken right out of circulation. The source uses this great analogy. It's hoarded like a bunch of squirrels saving away nuts for the winter. And while saving is an amazing personal habit, it totally defeats the purpose of an economic stimulus.
So the crucial point is this. When the whole goal is to kickstart the economy, the government isn't looking for savers. It's looking for spenders. It needs people who will take that money and immediately put it right back into the system. And this is why that distinction between high and low MPC isn't just some academic theory. It's the absolute key to making a program like this work.
And this brings us to our final section, a smarter stimulus. Based on everything we've just laid out, the study proposes a completely different, much more targeted approach for the next time a major economic downturn happens.
So here's the proposed model. Step 1, instead of that blanket helicopter approach, you surgically identify only the high MPC individuals. Step 2, you replace the one-off check with a sustained monthly payment. And the result is this amazing 1-2 punch. You get way more economic stimulation for every single dollar you spend, and you avoid that massive $850 billion price tag of the old method.
The benefits of this kind of model are really clear. The money goes directly to the people who need it the most and who will actually go out and spend it. This gives you a much bigger economic bang for your buck at a fraction of the total cost. And maybe the biggest shift here is moving from that one-time payment to sustained support, replacing what one person called a payment that was cool for 3 minutes with a predictable lifeline that can last for months.
So this all brings us to the final question. This model suggests we can have a stimulus that is cheaper, more effective, and much more targeted to the people who need help. It's a really powerful idea, and it's backed by a lot of data. The real question is, when the next economic crisis hits, will policymakers stick with that old helicopter approach, or will they be willing to embrace a smarter, more precise strategy? What we learned from the last crisis might just be the key to navigating the next one.
You've probably seen the headlines buzzing around. Something about a new payment for Social Security recipients? Well, we're going to break down exactly what that's all about. It's a proposal that's getting a ton of attention, and we need to talk about what it could actually mean for millions of people. Okay, let's get right into it.
Okay, so the number at the absolute center of this whole conversation is this: $1,400. And look, this isn't just some random figure pulled out of a hat. It is the exact amount at the heart of a new proposal aimed squarely at people on Social Security.
So what is this really? Well, there's a pretty influential advocacy group called the Senior Citizens League, and they're the ones pushing for what they call a one-time catch-up payment. Now, the key thing to understand right away is that this is not a permanent monthly increase. Nope. It's designed as a special, one-shot payment to give folks some immediate relief.
But that leads to the big question, right? Why now? I mean, a proposal for a payment this big, it doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. It's pointing to a much, much deeper problem that advocates say has been brewing for years. So let's dig into the why behind this whole thing, and really the entire argument. It all comes down to one thing: the cost of living gap. Basically, there's this growing sense that the money seniors are getting just isn't keeping up with what things actually cost day to day. And that gap is getting dangerous.
So to really get a handle on this gap, we've got to talk about COLA, the cost of living adjustment. It's that annual raise that Social Security recipients get. And its whole job, its only job, is to make sure your benefits can buy the same amount of stuff this year as they did last year, even when prices go up. On paper, it's supposed to be a perfect system.
But in the real world, is it working? Well, according to people like Shannon Benton from the Senior Citizens League, the answer is a big no. She talks about a sharp erosion in what people can actually buy. She's arguing that those yearly COLA raises just aren't keeping up with the soaring costs of essentials. We're talking food, housing, and a big one, healthcare.
And listen, this gap is a huge deal because of just how much people depend on these benefits. I mean, look at this. For almost 40% of folks, Social Security isn't just some of their income, it's all of it. It's their entire income. So for that group, when the COLA doesn't cut it, there's literally no other safety net. That's it.
Okay, so if we all agree the COLA isn't quite doing its job, the obvious next question is why? What's broken? And that question takes us right into the really technical, nerdy heart of this whole debate. It's all about a disagreement over the formula, the math used to figure out inflation for seniors.
Let's break this down, because it can get a little confusing. Right now, the COLA is calculated using something called the CPIW. Now, this index looks at what urban workers are buying. Things like gas for the commute, new clothes for the office. But here's the problem. Advocates say seniors spend their money completely differently. They spend way less on gas and way, way more on things like healthcare. So they want to switch to a different index, the CPIE, which is specifically designed to track spending for the elderly. It gives a lot more weight to those crucial costs.
And you might be thinking, is this just some niche idea? Not even close. When the Senior Citizens League actually surveyed retirees, the support for this change was just overwhelming. I mean, look at that number. A staggering 96% of the people they asked said, yes, the COLA should absolutely be based on how we actually spend our money.
And the numbers behind that feeling are pretty grim. You've got 1 in 5 seniors spending over $1,000 a month just on healthcare alone. 4 out of 5 feel like the official inflation numbers are a joke and don't match what they see at the grocery store. And then there's this. 13% of seniors are trying to get by on less than $1,000 a month. That's often below the poverty line. It's a tough reality.
So this idea of a one-time payment, it might sound kind of radical, right? But if you look back at our history, it's actually not a completely new concept. This whole conversation is really just the latest chapter in a long story of adjusting benefits when times get tough economically.
Yeah, I mean, this idea definitely builds on stuff we've seen before. Remember the Great Recession back in 2009? Social Security recipients got $250 checks then. And just a few years ago, there was a big push for a $200 a month increase. And of course, we all remember the stimulus checks, the economic impact payments during the pandemic. So you see, the idea of sending targeted direct cash, it's been done.
So history shows us it's possible, right? The government can step in and send direct help when things get bad. But, and this is a big but, it's really important to remember that just because it happened before doesn't mean it'll happen again. Every single proposal, including this one, has to fight its own battle through the current political and economic climate. Okay, so we've covered the what, the $1,400 payment, we've covered the why, the COLA gap, and we've looked at the history. Now let's pull it all together. Where does this proposal actually stand today? And, let's be honest, what are its chances of happening? You really have to understand how something like this becomes a reality. It's a journey. Right now, we are at the very beginning, steps 1 and 2. You have an advocacy group making a suggestion, and the media is talking about it. That's great. But for this to turn into actual money in someone's bank account, it needs to become a bill. That bill has to pass the House, and it has to pass the Senate. Then it has to be signed by the president. That is a very, very long and tricky road.
All right, so let's boil this whole thing down. What are the most important things to remember? Number 1, and this is the big one, this is just a proposal. It is not a law. Number 2, it's designed for all Social Security recipients. That means retirement, SSI, and SSDI. 3, the whole argument is that the current COLA formula is broken because it doesn't reflect what seniors actually spend money on. And finally, number 4, the fix they're suggesting has 2 parts. Change the formula for the future and give everyone a one-time payment to make up for the past. That's the whole shebang.
And all of this really leaves us with a much bigger, more fundamental question to think about. I mean, this whole $1,400 idea, it's just one possible answer to a huge challenge. As our economy keeps changing and the cost of everything keeps changing, how do we make sure our most important safety nets, things like Social Security, are changing right along with it? That's the real conversation, and it's one we're definitely going to be having for a long, long time.
You know, if you try to keep up with the news about Social Security, wow, it's a lot. One minute you hear about benefit cuts, and the next it's all about increases. It can make your head spin, right? So in this explainer, we're going to slice through all that confusion. We'll get right to the facts, separating what's actually happening right now from what's just being proposed for the future. All right, let's just ask the big question right up front. Is Social Security sending you more money? Well, the answer's a little complicated. For some people, yes, and for others, it's still a big debate. There's one major change that's already law and has led to significant payouts for a specific group of people. For everyone else, there are other big ideas on the table. Our goal today is to show you exactly what's what.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today.
Now we're looking ahead to what's on the horizon. Let's dive into some other big legislative proposals that could mean more money for a lot more people down the road.
Right now, there are really 2 big ideas floating around for a future raise. On one side, you have the Social Security Expansion Act, a proposal from Senator Bernie Sanders. It's pretty straightforward. Give everybody on Social Security an extra $200 a month. And to pay for it, raise taxes on the highest earners. On the other side is a more targeted approach. The idea here is to send those extra checks only to the lowest income beneficiaries. The theory is that they're the most likely to spend that money right away, giving the economy a more immediate jolt.
And just to put that first idea into real numbers, an extra $200 a month comes out to $2,400 a year. That would be a serious increase for every single person receiving benefits. But, and it's so important to remember this is still just a proposal. It has not been passed into law.
Okay, let's shift gears completely. There's a whole other vision for how to improve Social Security, and this one has nothing to do with passing new laws for benefit raises. Instead, it's all about making the system stronger from the inside out through better management and different tax policies.
And you can really see this viewpoint summed up in this quote from former President Donald Trump. He says, "I signed one big, beautiful bill and allowed no tax on Social Security for our great seniors." So for this approach, the key isn't necessarily bigger checks from the government, but letting seniors keep more of the money they already have by cutting taxes on their benefits.
So, wow, we've covered a lot of ground and some very different ideas for what's next. Let's try to pull this all together and figure out, what does this all mean for the future of your benefits?
Okay, so when you boil it all down, there are really 3 distinct paths we've looked at. First, you have the Fairness Act. The status on that one is confirmed law,
and it's already providing back pay and raises for that specific group affected by WEP and GPO. Then you have the two big future ideas. There's the legislative path, passing new laws to raise monthly checks for lots of people, and then there's the administrative vision, which is all about strengthening the system from within through efficiency and tax cuts.
And really, that brings us to the ultimate question, doesn't it? Bigger checks versus a stronger system. What's the right path forward? Should the main goal be getting more money into people's pockets every month to deal with the rising cost of living? Or should the priority be on creating a more efficient, streamlined, and fiscally sound system for the long haul? There's no easy answer, but whatever we decide will define the future of Social Security for tens of millions of Americans.
Today, we are really getting into the weeds on the future of supplemental security income, SSI. There are some huge proposals out there that could completely change the game for millions of people. We're talking bigger monthly checks and a massive jump in how much you're allowed to save. But when you peel back all the layers, all these proposals really come down to one single critical question. Is SSI, as it stands today, actually keeping up with the cost of living? This is the core problem we're going to unpack, because for almost 8 million people, the answer to that question really dictates their entire life.
So let's just step back for a second. SSI was created, over 50 years ago, and it had a super clear mission: to be a financial safety net. It was designed to fight poverty, and for a while, it did its job. But over the years, a gap started to appear, and that gap has just kept growing, leaving the whole program and the people who rely on it falling further and further behind.
Okay, so just to make sure we're all on the same page, what exactly is SSI? It's a really important federal program run by the Social Security Administration that gives a monthly income to adults and kids with disabilities, and also to folks 65 and older who have very little in terms of income and resources. And this right here is the absolute key to its original design. The whole idea from day one was that the payments would keep people right at the federal poverty line. Not way above it, sure, but definitely not below it. It was supposed to be a floor, a baseline of financial stability. And remembering that original goal is so important for understanding where things are today.
So this idea of falling behind, it isn't just a feeling. It's not a hunch that things are getting tougher. It is a measurable, quantifiable gap. And the numbers, they tell a really, really clear story about the difference between the program's original promise and today's reality.
Okay, let's start with the benchmark. For 2025, the official federal poverty line for one person is $15,650 a year. But nobody pays their rent once a year, right? So let's break that down by month. That comes out to $1,304. Remember that number. It's our baseline. Now let's look at what's actually happening for someone on SSI. The absolute maximum federal payment a single person can get in 2025 is $967 a month. That's the ceiling. You can't get $1 more from the federal government. So right off the bat, you can see those two numbers are not the same. And when you put those two numbers right next to each other, like in this chart, wow, the gap just jumps right out at you. It's not even close. The maximum benefit falls way short of that poverty line, and this difference has just been getting worse year after year. So do the math. The difference is $337. That's the hole people find themselves in every single month. To put it another way, the maximum SSI check is nearly 35% below the very poverty line it was created to meet. That is a massive gap to cover when you're on a fixed income. Okay, so that's the problem. It's a big one. But how do you fix it? Well, there are some pretty concrete plans being floated around. And maybe the biggest one is a piece of legislation called the SSI Restoration Act. It's designed to attack that income shortfall we just talked about head on.
And this proposal is getting a lot of attention. In the source material we looked at, one analyst put it pretty bluntly, saying the SSI Restoration Act, in my opinion, is a really, really good one. It checks literally all the boxes. So it's seen as this complete fix, not just some tiny little patch.
So what are these boxes that it checks? Well, first and foremost, the Act wants to raise monthly benefits to 100% of the federal poverty line. That means, boom, an instant $337 a month raise for someone getting the max benefit. And this part is crucial. It would then tie or index those benefits so they automatically go up with the poverty line every year.
That way, this gap can never open up again. The act also tackles the marriage penalty, which can hurt married couples, and it wants to seriously raise those ancient asset limits, which we're going to talk about next. Okay, reality check time. This is really, really important to understand. The SSI Restoration Act is still just a proposal. Right now, it has not been passed by Congress. It's been introduced, it's being talked about, but it is not the law of the land. But, a bigger check is only half the story. There's another huge problem that's kind of baked into the system right now, and it has everything to do with saving money. Okay, so the asset limits for SSI, that's how much money you can have saved up, are stuck in a time warp. They haven't been updated in decades. Right now, the limit for one person is just $2,000. I mean, think about that. Your car breaks down, your fridge dies, you have one unexpected medical bill, that can wipe you out completely. It basically makes it impossible to build any kind of real safety net. So the proposed fix for this is, well, it's dramatic. The asset limit for an individual would jump from $2,000 all the way up to $10,000. And for a couple, it would go from $3,000 to $20,000. I mean, that is a night and day difference. Let's just pause on that individual number for a second. Going from $2,000 to $10,000, that's a 500% increase. We are not talking about a small tweak here. This is a massive shift in policy, basically admitting that the financial world of today is nothing like it was when these old limits were set. And what does that really mean for someone's life? It's not just about the numbers. It's about security. It's about having that peace of mind that comes from knowing you have a rainy day fund. It means you could actually save for an emergency without that constant fear of losing the very benefits you need to survive. Okay, so we've got these two huge ideas on the table, one to boost monthly income and one to raise the savings limit. But what does it all mean? How does a plan like this go from being an idea to being a reality? Well, it all comes down to the process in Washington. First, lawmakers have to introduce the bills, which, they've already done. After that, the bills have to get debated in committees and then eventually get voted on by both the House and the Senate. If, and that's a big if, a bill passes, then it goes to the Social Security Administration to actually put the changes into effect. But it's key to remember where we are right now. These are all still just proposals on paper. All right, so let's just do a quick recap of the whole shebang. We're talking about 4 big things. 1, bigger checks, with that $337 monthly boost to get up to the poverty line. 2, higher savings with that 500% jump in the asset limit. 3, fairer rules, getting rid of that penalty for married couples. And 4, future-proofing the system by tying benefits to the poverty line so this whole mess never happens again. When you step back and look at it, these proposals are really a total rethinking of what SSI is and what it does. They're trying to bring it back to its original promise of being a real anti-poverty safety net. But the million-dollar question remains, is there enough political will to make these big plans a new reality for the millions of Americans who rely on it? And that's what we'll all be watching.
Okay, let's talk about a pretty wild idea. What if every single person on Social Security got the exact same check every month? I mean, not based on how much you earned during your career, but just one flat amount for everyone. It's a really radical proposal, and it's starting to get some serious attention because it would completely transform one of the country's most important programs. So let's dive in and really unpack what this is all about.
Right now, the system is the complete opposite of flat. It's all over the place. You've got some folks on one end getting as little as, say, $50 or $60 a month, and then on the other extreme, the maximum possible benefit is over $5,000. That is a gigantic gap, and it's really the core issue that's fueling this whole conversation.
So, before we can really get the logic behind this flat benefit idea, we've got to first understand this huge divide in the current system. It's kind of like a tale of 2 different programs.
And look, this isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. This disparity has very real, very human consequences. Right now, there are about 11 million seniors in the U.S. living below the federal poverty line, and a lot of them depend on Social Security. That one number alone just shows you how high the stakes are here.
Yeah, that maximum benefit, the one around $5,000, it gets a lot of attention. But the reality for most people, it's nowhere close to that. The average retirement benefit is actually just under $2,000. And if you're on disability, SSDI, the average is even lower, just a bit under $1,600. So this chart really shows you the vast majority of people are a long, long way from that top payment.
This quote from one of the sources we looked at just hits the nail on the head. It talks about this massive bifurcation, and that's exactly what it is, a system split in two, where some people are getting just a few dollars, while others are getting thousands. This is the problem the flat benefit idea is trying to solve.
So what's the big idea to fix this divide? Well, it's to completely flatten the whole system, to create one single universal benefit amount that every single qualified person would get every single month.
And the number that's being talked about is around $2,200 a month. Now that number wasn't just picked out of a hat. It's what they've calculated as the equilibrium point, the spot where the high-end and low-end benefits would eventually meet in the middle.
So how would we even get there? I mean, you can't just flip a switch overnight. The whole idea is that it would be a gradual process. You'd be systematically raising the payments for people at the bottom, while at the same time, you're slowly lowering the payments for people at the very top until everybody eventually lands on that same flat number.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. That sounds like a massive, complicated undertaking. So how would a change this huge actually work in practice? Let's get into the mechanics.
It really breaks down into about 4 main steps. First, you start to phase down those high-end benefits over several years. A really key part of this is step 2. You'd stop giving the annual cost of living adjustments, the COLAs, to the highest earners. Step 3, all the money you save from that gets rerouted. And finally, step 4, you use those funds to boost up all the low-end benefits until they hit that target equilibrium point.
Now, a really big piece of this whole debate is the timeline. How long would this take? Is it a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, maybe even 15 years or more? The source material shows there are different schools of thought on this. And it matters because the longer the timeline, the higher that final flat benefit is likely to be, just because of inflation and economic growth over time.
And there are a couple of different ways to actually bring those high-end benefits down. One idea is a simple annual deduction. You just trim their benefit by, say, 5% each year. The other, maybe a slightly gentler way to do it, is to just freeze their benefits by taking away their yearly COLA. That means their payment just wouldn't keep up with inflation anymore, and its real value would slowly decrease.
If a plan like this actually happened, it would be so much more than just a tweak to payment amounts. It would fundamentally change the entire purpose and identity of Social Security as we know it.
What this would do is basically turn Social Security into something that looks a lot like a guaranteed basic income, or GBI. And the idea behind a GBI is pretty simple. Everyone who qualifies gets the same recurring payment. It creates a true financial floor that no one can fall beneath. And this really gets to the philosophical heart of the whole thing. It would shift Social Security from being an earned benefit, where what you get out is tied to what you put in, to a system of universal support, where you get the benefits simply because you're a qualified citizen or resident. It's a huge change in thinking.
The potential results here are pretty massive. I mean, on the one hand, a move like this could lift millions of seniors and people with disabilities out of poverty. It would give them a stable, predictable income. It would also make the super complex Social Security formulas way, way simpler. But maybe most importantly, it forces us all to have a conversation about what we want Social Security to be in the 21st century.
Let's just boil it all down and put these two systems side by side. Right now, your benefit is based on your earnings history. In the new proposal, it's based on just being a citizen or resident. The benefit amount goes from totally variable to completely flat, and the main goal of the program itself actually shifts from replacing your income to preventing poverty, period.
So when you get right down to it, this whole debate makes us ask a really fundamental question about one of our most important institutions. Should Social Security be an earned benefit that you're entitled to based on your work, or should it be a guaranteed safety net for absolutely everyone? How we answer that question will really define its future.
Today, we're jumping into a really interesting idea that could totally change how we look at financial support, especially when times get tough. It's all about asking, is there a smarter way to help people out?
I mean, you feel it, I feel it, we all feel it, right? The price of just about everything seems to be going up and up. It puts a real squeeze on your wallet, and that leads us to a huge question. With costs climbing like this, is there a better, more intelligent way to provide some relief?
And that right there is the heart of the problem. We've all seen prices jump, but for a lot of people, especially folks on Social Security or other fixed incomes, the money coming in just isn't keeping up with the money going out. So we're going to look at one idea that's designed to fix that exact problem.
So what is this new idea all about? Well,
Because of all the economic challenges we've seen, experts are talking about a pretty major shift in how we handle this stuff. It's a much more targeted approach, and it's really different from what we've done in the past.
The big number at the center of this whole proposal is $2,000. And no, not just as a one-off payment, but as a regular monthly check. This is the number that supporters think could offer some real, consistent help.
Okay, so how would this thing actually play out? Well, the idea is for these ongoing monthly checks, but, and this is the key difference, they wouldn't go to everybody. They'd be aimed specifically at low and fixed income households. The whole goal is to give them immediate spending power to help them cover that gap that inflation has created.
But why do it this way? Why only target certain people? Well, it all boils down to the economics of how different people spend their money. And honestly, this is where the whole proposal gets really fascinating.
The key concept has this really fancy-sounding name, the marginal propensity to consume, or MPC. But don't let the name fool you, it's actually super simple. All it means is, when you get an extra dollar, how much of it do you spend and how fast do you spend it? This one idea is crucial to understanding the entire plan.
And when you look at the studies on this, it's pretty wild. When a lower-income household gets a $2,000 payment, they spend about 80% of it, that's $1,600 in the first 10 days. The rest of it, gone within the next month. That super fast spending is exactly what economists mean when they say someone has a high MPC.
And this just lays out the big difference, right? People with a high MPC, who are usually on lower incomes, spend new money almost immediately, often because they have to, for necessities. On the flip side, folks with higher incomes, the low MPC group, are way more likely to save it, invest it, or pay off debt. That money doesn't get pumped back into the economy nearly as fast, if it even does at all.
So this brings us to a really important comparison. To really get why this new targeted idea is even on the table, we've got to look back at those big stimulus checks that went out in 2020 and 2021 and kind of learn from what happened.
The difference between these two plans is just night and day. The old stimulus went to about 85% of everyone. And look, the intention was good, but the absolutely massive cost was a big factor in the inflation we're all dealing with now. This new proposal is meant to be the exact opposite. Surgically targeted, way less expensive, and designed to give a focused boost to the economy without causing prices to spiral.
Okay, let's really zero in on that cost difference, because the numbers here tell you everything you need to know about why this new strategy is being considered. Those widespread stimulus checks from a few years back, they cost around $850 billion. Just think about that number for a second. It's a staggering amount of money to push into the economy all at once.
Now compare that to the estimate for this new targeted idea. Giving 3 monthly checks of $2,000 to about 50 million people would cost around $100 billion. That's less than an eighth of the cost for what's argued to be a more direct and sustained impact.
So what does that really mean in practice? It means for a tiny fraction of the cost, this plan could give more consistent, ongoing help directly to the people who need it, all while trying to avoid that big inflationary wave that ends up hurting everybody in the long run.
And all of this leads to what a lot of the experts behind this idea are calling the win-win argument. It's a vision for a more focused, more efficient, and you could argue a fairer way to handle economic relief in the future.
So the argument really is that it's just a smarter way to do things. You're getting money straight to the people who will actually spend it, which gives you a much better bang for your buck in terms of stimulating the economy. And by learning from the past, the goal is to be more cost-effective and a lot fairer, especially to those whose incomes have fallen behind.
And in the end, it really does come back to this simple quote. The whole point of a stimulus check is for people to spend it. I mean, that's why it's called a stimulus. Giving it to people who are just going to park it in a savings account doesn't really achieve that goal. Giving it to the folks who'll spend it right away absolutely does.
Which, of course, leaves us with that one big question. When you look at the lessons from the past, and you follow the economic logic we've just walked through, could this kind of targeted approach be the future of financial relief? It's definitely a powerful idea to think about.
Today, we're diving into some really big proposals that could change the monthly benefits for millions of people who receive Supplemental Security Income, or SSI.
All right, let's start with this number. For 2025, the absolute maximum federal SSI benefit for a single person is $967 a month. That's the ceiling, the most anyone can get from the program each month.
And that brings us to the big question, right? With the cost of everything these days, rent, food, you name it, a lot of people are asking if that amount is really enough to get by. So to really get what these proposals are all about, we first have to understand the problem they're trying to fix. And it really all comes down to a growing financial gap between SSI benefits and the official poverty level.
You know, it's interesting. When this program was created more than 50 years ago, the whole point was to act as a safety net, to keep people right at the federal poverty line. But over the decades, well, it's fallen behind.
And this chart just lays it all out, doesn't it? On one side, you've got the max SSI benefit at $967. On the other, the 2025 federal poverty line, which is $1,304. You can literally see the gap right there. And that difference comes out to $337 every single month. That's the shortfall. And that number is at the absolute heart of this whole debate. You can really feel the urgency in this quote from our source material. I mean, that's pretty powerful language, and it just shows how strongly some people feel that the system needs to be modernized to close that gap.
Okay, so we've seen the problem. Now, what are the proposed solutions? Well, the first big one is a piece of legislation aimed squarely at closing that financial gap we just looked at.
It's called the SSI Restoration Act. You can basically think of it as a big package of updates trying to modernize parts of the program that, frankly, haven't been touched in decades. The single biggest, most significant change in this act would be to raise the maximum monthly benefit to match the federal poverty line. The goal is to get the program back to doing what it was originally intended to do. So remember that $337 gap? This would close it. For someone getting the maximum benefit, this would mean a direct increase of $337 a month, bringing their total from $967 up to that poverty line figure of $1,304.
Now, this is absolutely critical to understand. This is a proposal. It's being discussed, but it has not been passed by Congress. It is not current law.
Okay, so the next big proposal tackles another part of the program that critics say is seriously out of date, the super strict limits on how much money a person can have in savings.
These limits on assets, they haven't been updated for inflation in decades. This makes it almost impossible for people to save up even a small emergency fund for, a car repair or an unexpected bill.
And the proposed change here is huge. The asset limit for a single person would jump from the current $2,000 all the way up to $10,000.
And for married couples, the increase is just as dramatic. It would go from that long-standing $3,000 limit to a proposed $20,000.
To put that in perspective, for an individual, that's a 500% increase in how much they'd be allowed to save without being penalized or losing their benefits.
So, with such significant changes on the table, the natural question is, okay, what's the holdup? What's the current status of all this in Congress?
So just to sum it all up, the SSI Restoration Act is really this bundled package of reforms. It's trying to raise the benefits to the poverty line and also massively increase those savings limits, tackling the two major issues we've just covered. And this brings us to the bottom line. As of today, August 16th, 2025, the SSI Restoration Act has not passed. It is still just a proposal.
So that leaves us with a final thought for this explainer. When you look at that documented gap between the benefits and the poverty line and the fact that these rules haven't been updated in decades, it really makes you wonder, what level of priority should reforming SSI have on the national agenda?
You know, there's a number that's been making a lot of noise lately. A number that could mean an extra $2,400 a year for every single person on Social Security. It's a huge proposal, sparking a ton of hope, but also a pretty fierce debate. So today, we're going to dig in and find out what's really going on.
You've probably seen the headlines, right? The posts on social media, the chatter online, a $2,400 boost to your annual Social Security check. But is this a real possibility we should be paying attention to, or is it just, political noise? Let's try to separate the facts from the fiction here. Okay, so first things first. Let's talk about the promise itself. We need to break down these numbers that have grabbed everyone's attention and figure out what they could actually mean for millions of American retirees.
So, the big number at the heart of this whole thing is $2,400. That's the proposed annual increase that every Social Security recipient would see in their pocket. And let's be honest, in a time when the cost of everything from gas to groceries seems to be going up, a figure like that, well, it's no wonder it's capturing the public's imagination.
Now, What does a big annual number like that actually mean for your day-to-day life, for your budget? Well, if you break it down, it comes out to an extra $200 every single month. For a lot of folks, that's not just some small bonus. That could be a game changer. That could be the difference needed to cover utility bill, afford prescriptions, or just have a little more breathing room without all that financial stress. It's that monthly figure that makes this proposal feel so real and so appealing.
So where did this idea even come from? It's not just a number somebody pulled out of thin air. It's actually rooted in a formal piece of legislation that's making its way through Washington, D.C. right now. The whole proposal comes from a bill called the Social Security Expansion Act. This is the official legislation that's been introduced in Congress, and its main goal is to make this increase a reality. And that's a really key point. This isn't just a talking point, it's a defined proposal with a very clear objective: boost benefits by $200 a month.
Of course, this immediately brings up the biggest question you can ask with any new spending. Who's going to pay for it? Well, the proposal's answer is to adjust the Social Security payroll tax cap. Right now, there's a ceiling on how much of a person's income gets taxed for Social Security. This act would raise that cap, or maybe even get rid of it altogether. That means high-income earners would end up contributing on a much, much larger portion of their earnings. As you can probably guess, this is one of the most controversial parts of the whole plan.
To really get a feel for the real-world impact, just look at the average person receiving benefits. Right now, their monthly check is around $1,800. With this boost, it would jump up to $2,000. That's about an 11% increase, which is pretty significant. And what this chart doesn't even show is that for people who are on minimum benefits, the impact would be proportionally even bigger. We're talking potentially life-changing.
Okay, so now we have to make a big shift from talking about what the proposal is to whether it could ever actually happen. Because while the idea of an extra $2,400 a year sounds fantastic, its path to becoming law is, to put it mildly, filled with some major political and economic roadblocks.
Yeah, the road to this becoming a law is incredibly steep. I mean, first, politically, it's facing just deep divisions in Congress. Fiscally, it runs headfirst into some really serious concerns about the long-term health of the entire Social Security system. And then you've got the logistical side, potential delays, these really complex questions about fairness between generations, and even unknown ripple effects on other government benefits. It's a lot to tackle.
Let's just break down the debate a little. On one hand, supporters argue, pretty passionately, that this boost is absolutely essential to help seniors keep up with the rising cost of living. They also say, hey, putting more money into the hands of 70 million people, that would be a huge stimulus for the economy. But on the other side, you've got critics raising all sorts of alarms. They're saying it's fiscally irresponsible, and they're worried that injecting billions of dollars into the economy could actually fuel inflation. They also bring up that concern that it puts an unfair financial burden on younger generations who have to foot the bill.
It's also really important to manage our expectations about timing. Even in the absolute best-case scenario, the journey from a proposal to an actual payment in your bank account is a long one. A bill gets introduced, then it faces this lengthy, often really contentious debate in Congress. It would almost certainly be changed and modified through compromises. Only after all of that, maybe, it gets approved. And even then, implementation would probably be phased in over time. The big takeaway here? No one should expect to see an extra $200 in their check anytime soon.
And you know, this quote from the source material really gets to the heart of the matter. This whole conversation we're having about a $2,400 boost is really a symptom of a much larger issue. The Social Security system as a whole is facing a crisis, and it desperately needs reform. The question isn't just about this one proposal, it's about how we're going to ensure the entire system stays solvent for our kids and grandkids.
Okay, so with all this uncertainty floating around, what does any of this mean for your own financial planning? Let's step beyond the headlines for a minute and focus on what you can actually control.
This is such a fundamental point, and it often gets lost in these kinds of debates. It's really worth remembering that when Social Security was first created, it was designed to be one part of a three-legged stool for retirement, right alongside personal savings and pensions. It was never ever meant to be the only source of income for retirees. And keeping that context in mind is absolutely essential for responsible financial planning.
Relying on political promises is a really risky strategy for something as critical as your retirement. Taking proactive control of your own financial security, that is the most reliable path forward, no matter what happens in D.C.
You go online and it seems like everyone is talking about one thing: is a fourth stimulus check on the way? Well, the real answer, it turns out, isn't a simple yes or no, and it's definitely not a date on a calendar. Today, we're going to dig in and figure out what actually needs to happen for another check to even be a possibility. Okay, so this is it, right? This is the big one, the question on everyone's mind, and it's especially critical if you're on a fixed income, Social Security, SSDI, VA benefits. That hope for another payment is really, really strong. But to get a real answer, we've got to look beyond the headlines and get a handle on the economic reality of the situation. And honestly, this is the most important idea to grasp. A stimulus check isn't some scheduled payment. It's not a holiday bonus. It's an emergency tool, like a fire extinguisher in a glass case. Lawmakers don't just wake up one day and decide to send out money. Something major has to happen to force their hand. So the question isn't when, it's why. And that why? It's all about the health of the U.S. economy. So what are these big economic triggers? If you look back, every major stimulus payment we've ever gotten has been a reaction to a crisis. It's never proactive. So to figure out what might be coming, we have to learn to watch the same economic vital signs that the folks in Washington are looking at. I love this analogy because it makes it so clear. When the economy, our patient, is healthy and doing well, you don't give it medicine, right? Of course not. But when it gets sick, when it slides into a recession, that's when lawmakers reach for the medicine cabinet. And that stimulus is the dose they use to try and get things moving again. The sicker the patient, well, the bigger the dose of medicine. Now, of all the vital signs they check, the job market is, without a doubt, the most critical. It's the big one. See, when people are working, money is flowing, the economy is humming along. But the second you see widespread layoffs and rising unemployment, that is a massive flashing red flag that the entire system is in trouble. That's the one thing that gets everyone's attention. And the way we measure this is with something called the official jobs report. You might hear it on the news as the non-farm payroll report. It comes out on the first Friday of every single month, and it gives us this incredibly detailed picture of what's happening with jobs all across the country. So what's actually in this thing? Well, first, it's got the national unemployment rate. Is it going up, down? That's huge. Then it tells us exactly how many jobs were created, or, and this is the scary part, how many were lost that month. It even looks at average hourly earnings. Are people's wages growing, or are they stuck? And finally, the labor force participation rate. Basically, what percentage of Americans are actually working or trying to find work? If you see all these numbers turn negative and stay negative for a few months in a row, that's the clearest sign that our patient is getting sick. And this isn't just some abstract theory. If we look back at recent history, there's an undeniable pattern. Major economic problems have been followed consistently by stimulus payments. It's like a playbook they've used over and over again. Just look at this timeline. It lays it out perfectly. Back in 2001, after the dot-com bubble burst, the government sent out $300 checks. Then you fast forward to 2008,